welcome back, Greg. We're going to go and have a look at eclipses again, like a part 2 from what we did the other day.
Yeah, g'day, Luke. Good to see you again.
Yeah, we're not too bad. What we thought we'd come back because there's a lot to talk about with eclipses. And today, for those who are interested, we are going to get a little bit technical. And when we say technical, hopefully it'll explain what is an eclipse. And that's really what we were setting out to do in the beginning. But also, we'll cover things today like what generally is a good or a bad eclipse. And we say that in regards to the fact there's no such thing. But basically, it depends on the intensity of the eclipse and the planets and the rulers of the eclipse and what they're doing at the time of the eclipse. Would that be correct?
Exactly, okay. Luke.
So exactly. The other thing is eclipses, what we've just been discussing before we got on here today was that Greg was sharing with me, eclipses have their own individual cycle that lasts for quite a lot of years. The eclipse cycle, for example, that we've just gone through in April 2024, that's part of what he calls the Saris cycle 139, which started in, I think, what did you say, March 1501.
May 1501.
May 1501. And we'll show you that chart and how they work. But what that means is that all eclipses either start at the North Pole or the South Pole, and then every 18 years, is it? That cycle.
18.6 years.
18.6 years. The next eclipse within that cycle occurs, which will be partial, and it's either descending, i.e. it's coming from the North Pole heading to the South Pole, or it's ascending and it's going from the South Pole up to the North Pole. And they're all part of a cycle that's continuing over and above.
But what we can do is just start by just taking out a couple of the bloopers that we put in there last time, because I had to go somewhere and be in a hurry. And just for the viewers, what I'll do now is that I'll put up this one that was a little bit kind of, you were asking me about it, and you said to me, how does this work? And I said, well, let's have a look at this. Now, you got that up on your screen there now, Luke?
I do, yes.
Right. So this is what in my classes, this is...
Can you blow up that particular picture?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. It'll just make it a little bit easier to read and see.
And it should be PowerPoint slideshow. It should be that one there, and that should be bigger.
Much bigger. That's great. Okay, so that's what we want to see. We can read that a little bit better.
Right. Okay, so Luke, what I've done now is I've just put up a screen for you. So remember we had that conversation about the serpent,
yes,
and how the moon works.
Yep.
This is the diagram showing you.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Chinese face of the dragon and then the serpent body at the back. And I was explaining how the moon travels because of its, as it says here, because of the moon's elliptically inclined on average at 5.26 degrees. Its orbital path, a continuous rising and falling motion that is both progressive and regressive in aspect above and below the ecliptic. Those two words sum up, which I'll get to in a minute, the progressive and the regressive. So what we have here is the moon will spend, as we said before, its annual daily travel average is 13 degrees of zodiacal longitude.
Yes, that's right.
Right. And so it spends 14 days above and 14 days below, give or take, because we know the sidereal 27.3 of the moon's orbit around the Earth, and then the moon has to catch up to the sun, which is another 2 days. So then that's the tropical. So then it is 29.5 days. But in general, this is the lunation cycle. So what happens is the plane can only get up, because this is the plane of the moon. So it rises in latitude above the ecliptic at maximum 5.25 and at minimal 4.26 below.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it reaches those peaks, that is square to the node.
Okay.
So 90 degrees further on from its conjunction with the node. When it reaches these peaks here.
Yep.
Right? They call that the bending of the moon.
Okay.
Okay. And it has a significance in astrological terms. So astronomy can underpin astrology, but we have terms for the astronomical events that happen, and we then turn those and nuance them into how we might talk about it. And so Dane Rudhyar suggests that anything north, and the ancients also put this in writing, but it was a little bit more difficult for most people to understand. They call it the rise and the falling. But Dane Rudhyar said anything that is north is pioneering and new. Anything that is south and below is habitual and comfort.
Okay.
Hence the thing about the nodes. You know, we say the north node. In tropical astrology, we say the north node is taking us ahead and the south node is putting us back in familiar territory.
Okay. Yeah.
And of course, it's the moon. The moon is habitual. So our habits and the things that we do are associated with the moon below the ecliptic.
Yep.
And more pioneer when it's above. However, when it's on the ecliptic, which is 0 degrees of latitude here. Yep. When it's on the ecliptic, then it is seeding its seed. So the moon, a sun impregnates the moon at a lunation cycle. Okay. And that seed grows. And at an eclipse, it is always on the ecliptic. And so, therefore, that seed has some significance to the wider world, if you like. I always suggest that anybody, example, Donald Trump is born under a lunar eclipse, and so he's a lunar eclipse baby. Yep. And so anyone that's born with a new moon solar eclipse or partial eclipse, or the same with a lunar, then they will be drawn into the public. Because
the moon rules the public.
Well, it does in that sense, but also the sun is impregnating the moon. So therefore, they'll be drawn into the greater world of publicity.
Okay. Well, makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and that's something
that's how it works. Now, the lunation, as I've got down here, 12 lunations is 29. 12 lunations by 29.5 is 354 days.
Yep.
If we take that away, we've got 11.25 or 11.25 degrees. I said yesterday, it was the last talk, I should say, it's between 10 and 11 degrees. So it regresses. That's what the lunation does as far as the node's concerned.
Yes, okay.
It regresses back by this 10 or 11 degrees. So we did in that example when we spoke in part 1 is that this eclipse was on the 8th of April at 19 degrees. The next eclipse will be 10 or 11 days regressed.
From that date.
And at 9 degrees of Aries. So you see that the 10 or 11 is a variant of the speed and orbital speed of the Earth traveling around the sun at an average speed of 63,000 miles per hour.
Yeah.
And
we're only cruising.
Just in cruise mode, and the Earth rotating at 1,000 miles per hour. These are average speeds. So when we combine all of this, and when the moon goes closest, when it's closest to the Earth, it's perigee.
Yep.
And that's a supermoon.
That's a
when
supermoon.
It's furthest away, it's apogee, it's further away. So all of these are conditions that are applied to our prognostication of how it works. Now, in regards to what I also said, I said the 18.6, which is down here. So there's 133.3 days between each eclipse season.
You said 130, it's 173 you've got there. You said 133.
Yeah, between the eclipse seasons, not between how you get an eclipse. You get an eclipse if if we put a border mark up and say that in the center is 18.6 on either side of the node. So if the sun comes towards the north node or the south node and is approaching inside of 18.6 degrees or moving away from the node 18.6 degrees, it's a 36 degrees block.
Yep.
When the sun gets to in between that 36 degree block, there has to be an eclipse on either side.
Okay.
Right? Now that works with the south node and the north node. But between each series of eclipses, so we have the north node eclipses, which we're having now, and then you have the south node eclipses, which we have in October at the present time, that between the Aries and the Libran eclipses, the time frame is 173.3 years.
Okay. Days, you mean?
Days. I said
going to say,
years.
hang on a sec.
Days.
And on this slide, it still says 173.3 days between eclipse season.
That's
you
correct.
mean 133?
No.
Because on the
173.
Yeah,
so,
because you said 133.
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
Pull me up because.
And I did pull you up, and you still said no. It's 133.
Because there's a lot of technicality to all this.
Exactly.
And that's why we go through and have classes so that we can actually go through all of this stuff.
Oh, look, it's mate. I know when you're explaining something, and sometimes your head's in it, you're sort of like you're focusing on what's there rather than what's coming out your mouth sometimes.
Yeah.
All good.
So between each, we worked out between each eclipse season, there are 173 days. That gives you 346 days and 6 hours if you multiply that together.
Yep.
Right. Now, if you take 18.65 away from 365.25, you get that 346.
Yep.
Now, as I said before, what most people haven't realized, there's a formula for understanding the exaltations. Now, I won't go into that. We'll do that in another program.
Can you explain to everyone what an exaltation means? Because some people have no idea of that.
Yeah, and we'll go through that. We'll go through that later.
Just now, so people understand what it is. What is an exaltation? Where a planet is sitting in it's its strongest point in a particular sign.
Yes.
So
all the zodiacal signs, the planets, the planets themselves, which most people know as signs, like we have Aries and Taurus and Gemini.
Yep.
They're the abodes, if you like, or the domiciles or the homes of planets.
Mm-hmm.
And a planet has a familiarity or a correspondence in its nature to those signs.
Exactly.
And that's based on a whole lot of other stuff that I have to teach. Because that's based on the sun and the moon and the distance away and all sorts of different things like that. But when we spoke, because there was probably a lot of interest about the fixed marriage thing that I mentioned about the Navamsha and how the Navamsha works, and how we got onto the fact that the sun, for a male to marry a woman, the sun
I remember
goes forward ahead and to your natal moon, and from that date
go 40 days ahead.
40 days. Well, what I didn't mention is there's 9 of those occasions around the 360 degrees.
9 of them.
So there's 9
once again it comes into the 9, doesn't it?
Yeah, but there's 9 birth dates for a prospective bride.
Okay.
And if you land on one of those, and one of the interesting things I did is I went back in my research to have a look. And when I was doing that research many, many years ago, I looked at all the particular people that came into my life, i.e. partners. Yep. And it's amazing how many partners were associated with that.
With those dates?
Yes.
See, and how do you work out those 9, Greg? How do you work out those 9?
Well, as I said,
one of them you go ahead to the moon and go ahead 40 days from there.
Yeah. So you take your birth chart, where your sun is, you progress your sun forward to the date where it meets your moon. So for me, for my for instance, for me, I have a Leo sun. My moon is in Libra. So I keep going along. I look up the ephemeris or do it on an astrology program. And I find that the 29th of September is when my sun conjuncted my natal moon, because I'm born with a crescent moon. Okay. So on the 29th of September, or the 1st.
So you're talking about, you're not talking day for a year for a day. You're talking about just going ahead to that day.
Calendar days.
Yeah.
And we try and work with 30-day months instead of 31s and 28s. We round it off a little bit. You can either have a day before or a day after, but generally if it's on that date, it's pretty strong. So the 29th of September, if people come, I meet people from the 29th of September, particularly females, I know that that particular person will have something strong with me.
Okay, so you're talking about the fact that your moon, therefore, is at somewhere around the 5 degree, 6 degree mark of Libra.
You got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so what happens then, Luke, is let's say it's the 29th or the 1st of October. What we do then is we count 40 days. So we go roughly, we can use the 31-day months, but just to round it off, we go, okay, 30 days, another 30 days. So 30 days of October, and then we need another 10 days. So the 10th or 11th day of November will then produce another date.
So basically you're just going round to that particular point you talked about, your moon, from the sun. You look at the date of the sun's signs of anyone born on your moon, and you count 940s from there.
Exactly, 940s. So you go around. That's the Nabuncha chart, is a division of the circle by 9. And this is what the Hindus do when they are selecting a set marriage for their brides.
Yeah.
So this
is only for men, correct?
This is only for men. It's a much more complex thing if you're going to do it for women, because they're ruled by the moon.
Yes. So with that, do you do the reverse? I had a
the
feeling
sun to the moon, and so it's the moon to the sun. But
so you go, so you go the other way, don't you? So it's that sun to moon, and then the other way you do moon to sun.
Yeah, but the formula works out a lot different, because the moon moves 13 degrees every day.
Yes,
whereas the sun is predictable at 1 degree every day.
Oh, yes, I see. So there is a lot more complexity to that.
Yeah, and that's why it's and in general, under the cultural status of the Hindus, the man is the person.
So hear me out. I've just got a question in regards to that. So when you say, let's say, for example, I'm just going to be fairly roundabout. You've got someone's sun is at 0 degrees Taurus.
Yep.
Okay. And their moon is at 0 degrees Virgo.
Yep.
So that's 120 days ahead.
Yep.
So are you still?
You just go to that point. You go to that point. So you go to the 21st of September, 22nd of September.
When it's at 0 degrees, and then you take 40 days from there.
40 days from there, that easy. Yeah. You take the sun.
That's for the sun with
date of
that's
the
for
moon.
a man, a husband looking for a bride. Now, from a bride point of view, let's just say it was exactly the same.
A lot more complex, and I'm not going to do that now.
Okay.
Because that will only confuse.
Bad luck, girls. We can't find you a husband, but we can find the men a wife.
Well, we'll do that on another show.
I'm only stirring.
Because the Hindu culture, right? You've got to understand the Hindu culture. Okay, this is where cultures across the world vary.
Absolutely, and they vary.
And this is all about their diaries. It's all about, it's a complex thing to get into, and I don't want to.
We're not going to do that today with eclipses.
Yeah.
So we'll just get back on track with eclipses a little.
Okay.
So the next point, what else you were going to suggest? You were going to talk about something else as well, but I know today we wanted to cover the.
Yeah, we're going to talk about how eclipses are born.
Yes, that's right.
So I'm going to put a graphic up here.
Another graphic, which would be great.
Yeah, we'll put a graphic up here, and that graphic should be, let me have a look. Here it is here. This graphic you should have up here now. Is that a nice big graphic?
It's a big graphic. No one will be able to read it on their screens, but that's okay.
Right. So what this has got is I've got up here in the little box up here, the dialogue box, from the 1st of January 1500 OS, you know, because there's calendar dates we have to take into consideration when we do all of this. But wonderful program, Solar Fire, brought to us by the Australian astrologer Stephanie.
Yep.
This eclipses have a birth. So the one we're talking about at the present is
now explain what a birth is. It means it's starting. The eclipse is happening at right on the North Pole or right on the South Pole. Correct?
Yep. Let me just show you that now. Nice big one.
Yep.
Got it?
Yep.
So what this shows you is that the descending eclipse starts here at the North Pole, and they're partial eclipse. There he is there. So it starts up here right on the North Pole, and each time we have another eclipse 18.6 years later connected to that family, that birth. It moves down 10 degrees or 11 degrees.
Okay.
This is the regressing of the node.
Okay.
Right? So it's coming back down. And as it comes back down, this is the Tropic of Cancer here.
Mm-hmm.
And
where you've got abundance, that's the equator.
And that's the equator. And this is the Tropic of Capricorn. Yep. So you can see here it says 3 eclipses return to the same longitude every 54 years. Because if we multiply the 18 and the 18 and the 18, we get the 54.
Yep.
Which is the eclipse cycle. And it
so when you say longitude, it means where it's sitting in regards to the longitudinal area of the Earth.
That's correct. So every 54 years, the Great American eclipse that they have now will return to the same place.
Okay.
But it will be further along.
Further down.
As it descends down, or if it's a South Pole eclipse, it will rise up.
Okay. And that's why eclipses have families, i.e.
That's correct.
They start a particular cycle, and these eclipses, I think you talked about before we got onto this today, there's like something like 36 or 38.
38 concurrent eclipses running. There's 19, roughly 19 eclipses. There's hybrids as well, because nothing is perfect in an astronomical world where I suggested we're moving at 63,000 miles an hour in our orbit around the sun and tumbling at 1,000 miles per hour as the Earth. None of these things are exact, but in general, this is the way it works.
Okay.
And so we do have hybrids as well that sneak their way in, and some eclipses act erratically. Instead of going forward, sometimes they jump backwards. And these are some of the really interesting things that you get into in understanding how astronomy works, projected from the geocentric Earth. Geocentric meaning the center of the Earth.
Okay. So why does that say abundance when an eclipse is hitting the equator?
Oh, because I also have another slide that gives you an understanding.
Yep.
Let me see if I can find it here. Yeah, see that one?
Yep.
Right. So slow, cold and dark, warm and moist. This is the planets. This is how I teach geocentric astrology from archetypes to students.
Okay.
So Saturn's association is cold and isolation.
Mm-hmm.
In the context of Saturn, that's what it is. It's cold and it's isolation.
Yep.
Right?
Not
so
much
it
fun.
rules the poles.
Yep. Where all the ice is.
Rules the poles. It has a correspondence or an association with the poles. Then we have Venus and Jupiter. who are warm and moist and produce growth. So they're within the context of 33 degrees, or our roughly our 23 our 23 degrees of our tropics. So the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn are 23 degrees either side of the equator.
The equator, yep.
In between that is where growth is most seen.
Yep.
And then when you get to the equator, which is the tropics, if you go to Indonesia or you go to any of Africa or to the South American countries and the Caribbean, you see real growth. Trees are rainforests and things like this.
Yep.
So that's what we classify as abundance.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So hot and fast will also indicate, therefore, something like Mars and the Sun.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dry, fast, hot.
Yep. And that's why we not only do we get the moist, but we also get the deserts in those areas as well.
That's exactly right. And so this is the correspondence to the Earth. Now, Ptolemy, in my work going back over the many, many eons, I and especially from a lived experience from fishing and being out in nature all the time, I developed these tools to teach a correspondence to the Earth and what happens. Here's a little one for your viewers and for you, Luke. The Earth we live on, is at its core?
Molten magma.
And what would you associate that with?
Heat.
Mars.
Mars, yeah, well, okay. Yeah,
the archetype of Mars.
Mars, yes, you would.
What does Mars do? It procreates, it ejaculates.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
These are volcanoes that
plant
come
seeds.
up.
Yeah.
Right? Now, what does a volcano form?
Land mass.
What's land?
Well, it's basically minerals and association. It's the
Saturn.
Yeah, Saturn. The growth of
carbon. Saturn, carbon.
Yes. Yep.
Right.
And lead.
Yeah. So I say to people, the two bad guys are at the forefront of the world.
Yes, Mars and Saturn.
They're under the Earth playing this thing. Now, the other way I explain that is, how do you make a gun? We invented weapons. How do you make weapons? You get coal and steel, right? You get the coal and you heat the coal, and the coal heats up, and then you forge it and with hard labor on a fire, and you have to do that through burning carbon, which is Saturn. And so weapons are made from Mars and Saturn.
Yep.
And so the correspondence that I
but in that case, so is the growth of the Earth.
And so my correspondence that I put into understanding how things are is to do with my reading of Plato and all of the earlier Pythagoreans and also modern stuff as well, to get an idea of what we're actually associating it with. And that's why I said to you before that it's a science to astrology that I do. Yes.
Yeah, it's not obviously we are a living organism, and the astrology of the planetary energies affect us, and that affects everything from mood, thought, action, emotion, everything that we've got. And we're an interesting organism, but in actual fact, this is the basis behind those organisms and how they work.
Yeah. Now you should have a new slide up there now, which is showing my solar fire.
Yes.
So let's have a look at the event of the 17th of May, 1501, which is the birth of the eclipse 139 Saras series that we're having now. Okay. So this is the birth of it. And this is what I did, and it should say the 17th of May, 1501.
That's the one.
Yeah. Now, I design my own pages. I don't expect people to. It's not a normal astrology chart. No, it's a Hellenistic page that I designed. And so, but this is the birth of that eclipse. Now, according to the wonderful educator Bernadette Brady, who was also an Australian expat living, as most people would know, living in the UK, and she wrote some fabulous books back in the early times. In particular, I'll give her a plug for her book Eagle and the Lark, which is this one here. And what she did, she was interested in and forgive me, Bernadette, if I get it wrong, but she put down the birth of all of the eclipse families. She put 19 eclipses of the Saros cycle, and she called them north if they were of the northern declination.
So they're starting at the North Pole?
Of northern declination.
Yeah, okay.
We're talking about northern declination. And of the southern declination. So south, eclipses
or north
of the
equator. Yep.
Or the north.
Yep.
And what she did is she put together a book with a little bit of a brief description of how she might describe those births. And that gives a running, if you like, nuance to how you might judge the eclipse to being challenging an eclipse or one that perhaps is more favorable to us. And that's what the idea of this subject that we're talking about is. But
which is good or bad eclipses. How do we pick what's what?
Yeah, so I had to clarify a few things as we went along. But yeah, now the grifts of that is, if I go to Bernadette's book, and then she won't mind me reading out here, the Saros cycle for this one, which is 39, the Saros number comes from NASA. It actually comes from another guy that named it. I'm not going to get into that. But the Saros cycle 139, she has as Saros cycle 8 north. So it's a family. The family of 8 north, and there's one that's called 8 south, which is the one that will come in October.
Yep.
So they're north nodes and south nodes.
Yes.
Now she says that aspects, the new moon squares Uranus and is also on the midpoint of Mercury Venus. Pluto holds a powerful position as it occupies the midpoint of Venus Saturn, as well as the new moon node. In addition, there is a Mars Mercury square with Mars on the new moon Neptune point. Intensive flashes of genius are the hallmark of this Saros series. The individual will have intuitive leaps, insights, good ideas, visions, or vivid dreams. This newfound inspiration will pull the person away from him or her social life or relationship, thereby causing strain in the private life. This is a time when a person needs to be free, if only for a few weeks. Now, that's the short description she gives of the birth of this. So that is carried forward, supposedly, into the series of eclipses. So every 18.6 years, as this eclipse family moves along in time, you will then get that association with that eclipse. However, I did a whole lot of other work on my own in researching this, and some of it can be found on my website. But what I did is I started putting some of the eclipse, the eclipse now with that eclipse to see if there was any correspondence with it. And then I started playing with countries and things like that. One of the most interesting ones I did was Donald Trump. And I wanted to verify whether Donald Trump's chart may have been, whether it was a good data or dirty data, as we call it. And when I looked at Donald Trump's chart, I was amazed at the birth chart for Donald Trump's chart, because he was born on a lunar eclipse. His Sagittarius moon is conjunct the south node. His Gemini sun is conjunct the north node. So he's born on a lunar eclipse. And as I said before, the whole idea of eclipses brings you into the public. And so if all your viewers out there, if they go to an astrologer or they are astrologers themselves and they happen to be born on an eclipse, then they'll be drawn into,
The
as
public.
you said before, the moon is the crowd.
That's right.
It's the collective.
And the sun is the individual.
The sun is the individual in that sense, but it's our spirit as well.
Absolutely. So
it's our seed of spirit.
And the thing, just on another note with that, when you're talking about the eclipse, that's the full moon cycle, right on a full moon.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
So
a
being
lunar
born on
eclipse
a full moon,
and what we're talking about is a new moon, and this is the birth of the new moon. And interesting enough, for some reason, you always tend to have some correspondence with it. And of course, my south node is at 5 degrees of Gemini.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know,
sitting right on there.
Yeah, but as Chris Turner once used to say to me, you could pick a number in a lottery and there it is. But you do find that correspondence do play a part. So that's what I started to do. Look for many hours at different things and correspondence to these particular charts. And up here as well, this is how we judge whether this is making judgment, if you like. As the Egyptians say, they're weighing up to see what is actually happening. Is it good or is it bad? How much good has it got? How much bad has it got? And in an article I wrote that was published in New York, the Hebrews and the texts that were found in the caves in Israel, just outside of Israel, written in those texts were a certain part of light and a certain part of dark. And so for many thousands of years, this whole idea of light and dark, diminishment of light and dark, and Plato writes about it as well, you know, the horizontal line, the intertwining at daybreak of light and darkness. And this is about the allegoric story about us chasing our consciousness, if you like. If we have too much dark, or we have too much light, we need to look at balancement. And this is what it's like when we judge the chart. But you can see up here, I've got the day of the moon, and it happens to be the hour of Saturn, but I've got it for Sydney. Now, you could do this chart and the hour lords would change anywhere in the world.
Because of your time zone.
Yeah, and I do all my charts for the world from this. Can you see my little box?
I can see a little box there.
I've got a place called Null Island.
What do you call it?
I do it from Null Island.
Null Island?
Sorry?
Null Island.
Yeah, I just have to go forward an hour because of the time frame. Let me just go forward an hour. Go back an hour. So there's a couple of minutes difference here that I have to make up. It's 40, 48, 50, 51. There it is there. That's the same eclipse, 17th of May, Null Island. Now you can look up here, 0 degrees north, 0 degrees west. So this is the center of our demarcation of the Greenwich Meridian. So we as humans made the Greenwich Meridian as our longitudinal time zone. Our time from, right? And so I thought, this is many, many years ago, Ben Dykes, and kudos to you, Ben, found later on, he introduced this a couple of years ago, but I've been using this for over 25 years. And Null Island is also called the World Soul Buoy. It's off Senegal in Africa, in the Horn of not the Horn of Africa, the western coast of Africa, where it goes around Senegal and all those countries that go up towards Morocco.
Yep.
In Nigeria and those places in there. That's where 0 degrees of the Greenwich Meridian line runs down.
Yep.
And the equator crosses that. And they have a buoy there. And you know the name of the buoy? The World Soul Buoy.
The World Soul Buoy?
Yeah. It's called the Soul Buoy. That's what it's called. Null Island. It's fascinating. So I do all my world predictions
off Null Island.
Point.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's just, I just wanted to point that out. But what you can do is you can then put this chart anywhere you would like in the world,
That's right.
and you will get a different combination. So when you're doing mundane astrology for the world, the country that you want to look at, you put this eclipse there. Or
Okay.
you can do what I sometimes do, is use my astronomy program, find out exactly where that eclipse was, and place the eclipse exactly at that latitude and longitude. Now,
Gotcha.
one thing that doesn't change here is the planetary positions. The houses change. In other words, the
No,
quadrants.
the planets won't change because they have to be the same degrees. And
That's exactly
yeah.
it. And if you look here, this particular degree of the node, right? Because
Yes.
it's a partial eclipse, right? And what we were talking about before, this is at the extremity, because we have an eclipse in Aries at the present time at 19
Grab these
degrees.
glasses for a sec. So that's your 1919.
1919. And because if you see, this is a partial eclipse on the North Pole. It's a start, the birth of the family. It's 18.6 degrees from the node. Roughly, if you count 11 degrees, if you count the 19 or 20 degrees, you've got 10
Going
degrees
forward. Yep.
forward. So this is within that range,
Yep.
right? And so, but what you also look at, which Bernadette didn't look at, she may have looked at, but she didn't publish, is that I look at stars. They call them fixed stars, but I call them stars, portals of lights. They're suns, just like our sun, and they come from the past, because when we look up into the sky and we look at a star, that light,
it may have been burnt out years ago.
well, it wouldn't be burnt out. We're still looking at it, but
Yep.
it's coming. Supernovas burn out. It's coming to us on a portal, so it's witnessed the past. Now, guess what's it in on the 17th of May, 1501 OS, old style calendar. Guess what's at 1919 degrees?
Yeah, have a look.
Argol. Argol, the fixed star Argol.
Oh, okay.
Algol or Argol.
Algol, yeah, which is the most evil star in the
Well,
universe. Technically.
nothing's evil. It's a feminine.
I'm just going through with the ancients' way of looking at it. It's the most evil star.
It's a challenging feminine star, because it belongs to the Taurian set of stars. And if we go back to the mythology, we understand that this is part of Medusa, and this is the challenges of Perseus, and he had to go down and slay, and the 12 labors and all that sort of stuff. So we understand that Medusa is part of this, and Capulus and losing your head and all those. So this is a really strong feminine star. And so that was really interesting to see it there for that. So what I do then, I overlay the, if I go to Sydney, tell me if this goes straight to Sydney, because I don't know how it works on here. Let's hope it does. And it goes to the Sydney one.
Yeah, it's gone to Sydney.
Right. So this is the chart for Sydney. So we could see, I don't want to go there, but we've just had a terrible incident here in Sydney as I speak. But if you were doing and you wanted to understand astrology, you need to be able to understand how things may or may not, the archetypes may or may not flavor the weather, if you like, and how things are. And this particular eclipse, if the birth of this particular eclipse, because this all comes back, of course, to what we said. What makes a challenging eclipse? What makes an eclipse that perhaps lifts us up and gives us something? Now, I read the passage to you from what Bernadette Brady put together for this eclipse. but I wasn't satisfied with that. Even though it gives me a starting point and it's good, I wanted to understand a little bit more. So I started playing with this stuff. And if you look at this eclipse that we've just had, and I'll do that in a minute, but this is the birth of that eclipse. Now you can see Mars is in Pisces on the descendant. Okay. And
the
so
descendant, just so people know, that's where it's Mars has been the red planet across to the right, and descendant, which says DS, and across there is the ascendant, which is the opposite side.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
what,
I'm sorry,
just so
I
everyone
use-
knows, Greg's using a whole of sign houses here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we define that because we want to look at define the houses, the spheres above the earth. We define those as being places of topics.
Yep.
Okay. And what modern astrology does, and don't get me wrong, there's a purpose for using quadrant houses, trisecting the ecliptic and having what's called house cusp. But do you know what the word house cusp means?
You tell me.
Cusp means center. Okay, that's its original meaning. The meaning of cusp is center. And so when you put a quadrant house up with its cusps, you're putting the idea of the center of the house up rather than the full house. And so what you're doing is you're gauging the strength by trisecting either the ecliptic or the local space above you. You're putting up something that is at the center. So it's about gauging the power of the angles above you. This is all astronomy, Luke, and it's a wonderful tool that can aid us if we got patience.
We got patience.
That's why a lot of astrologers opted for the, if you like, the psychological astrology, if you like, and the counseling astrology, because prognostic astrology is a science.
Yes, and it's much more complex.
Yeah.
And the delineation of that and being able to put that into layman's terms can sometimes be quite difficult.
It can. It takes a while to. It takes
it's
a while
time consuming
to understand language.
Yeah, it's time. It's like I can look at a chart. I can look at a chart and see what's going on. I know what's happened, during somebody's lifetime, or what's potentially how they're going to, what their views are, how they see things. That's fairly easy to grab because most people, and I mean even on this podcast, people will be sitting there going, "Oh my God, it's technical." A lot of people don't necessarily want all the detail. However, here, I think it's important what you're doing is to show that detail as to how it's born and what they are. So do you want to now move along into trying to be in simple terms, what determines a positive eclipse versus a potentially more challenging, or as people might say, negative eclipse?
Well, let me just go here.
Or have I jumped ahead? So what we'll also try and do is cover when eclipses fall in each particular sign, how its impact is. So what have you got here?
Here we have the eclipse for Sydney on the 9th of April at 4:49 a.m.
Yep.
And it's 19 degrees 24. And we've got the chart up there. And of course, the ascendant is 24 degrees of Pisces.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the lord of the eclipse, as I said before, the landlord of Aries, the planet that corresponds and rules Aries is Mars. And
so we've got to therefore look strongly at where Mars is at the time of the eclipse and what it's doing.
Yeah, and it's slow, and it's just risen. The ascendant is 24 degrees, and Mars and Saturn are at 14 and 13. So Mars is in the strongest position here. It is leading all of these planets. What would you call that, Luke?
That's a big stellium of planets going through there, and it's also
a locomotive. They used to refer to it as.
It's pulling along a train behind it.
Yeah, well, we've got two motions because we've got the diurnal motion. For those that aren't familiar what diurnal motion is, That's the rotation of the Earth. And it goes this way, from
Yep.
the east across to the west.
Mm-hmm.
But the planets themselves
I'm moving the
go
opposite
this
way.
way.
Yeah.
Right? So you have two different motions. And that's important to understand as well. So Mars is ruling this locomotive, pushing all this energy along, and it's about to conjunct Saturn, and it's coming down from a dexterous position, which means it's coming from the right. It's coming down on top of Saturn. It's taking all of its energy to Saturn, and it is the lord of a retrograde Mercury, a Chiron, a sun, moon, exactly on the Chiron.
Yep.
This is a conjunction of Venus, the node, north node, the moon at 19, the sun at 19, Chiron at 19, and at 24 degrees retrograding back to meet them all is Mercury.
Yep.
Being pushed along by Mars and Saturn. So how would you describe in a astronomical language, how would you describe that? Well, I happened to get out one book that you and I are very, very familiar with, which is The Combination of
Stellar Influences
by Reinhard
Hang
Ebertag.
on. There we go.
You've got the red version, I got the blue version.
Same book.
Same book. Now I've got it open.
It's one of the two books that I use. That and the rule sheet book. That's
I've
about
got it open on page 156, and it says Mars Saturn.
Yep. Let's have a look at its principle.
And its principle is harmful or destructive energy, inhibited or destroyed vitality. Social correspondence, manual labor, miners, energetic people who are able to overcome the greatest difficulties. Problematic is weakness and threats to life, tests of strength, disputes, separations, causes of death. And when you throw in Mercury, thoughtfulness, hopelessness, thoughts of separation, illness, death, or the next world or beyond, news of mourning and bereavement, murdered. Now, I don't want to lay on those terms, but that's how we might, as I suggested before, understand. And then we have to put in the positives. So we
I was going to say, because don't forget, under normal circumstances, or under circumstances, this wasn't necessarily a negative eclipse because the sun is at its exaltation point, which gives it a lot of power. However, that said, the sun will also put a bit more energy and light onto it. So would you be right in saying in this particular case, especially with Mars Saturn, that some of those events will be highly harsh and bad, and others might be quite driven and energetic and achieving, you could say. So depending on where you sit in that cycle.
Oh, absolutely. And as I suggested before, the other thing that intensifies, so intensifies either the intuitiveness of this, as Bernadette Brady suggested, this particular 139 has this wonderful intuitive energy, this powerful energy that you and I are using at the present time to go forward with advancement. We also have the intensity of this solar eclipse being perigee. So it's a supermoon, new moon. In other words, the moon at this moment in time is at 358,000 kilometers toward. That's where it is. It's close to the Earth. So it's at its perigee. It's closest to the Earth. So it's intensifying the shadow. Because we're not talking about the intensity. If this had been just a normal lunation without the moon being, with the moon being north. So if the moon was up at 5.2 in its plane and we had the new moon, then that would be a really productive one. But because we have an eclipse in this situation and it is a perigee eclipse, it's superimposed and strong. it's on the exaltation of the sun. So it's
Yep.
even more powerful. So this is a really strong based eclipse. Now it has Chiron with it. And if the viewers don't understand who Chiron was the teacher of Perseus.
Yep.
So Chiron is kind of the warrior. It's our word. Now, what most people don't understand, now this is all going into understanding just one eclipse. All of this stuff I'm bringing in here. Now, what most people don't understand as well, where is this eclipse with regards to Chiron? Because it encapsulates Chiron. It's right on Chiron.
Yep.
Right? And Chiron is called the healer. So it's through wounds, Achilles got wounded or the arrow was shot into his heel. And so Chiron's about healing, about a state of healing as well. But Chiron at the present time, from the time it meets 23 degrees of Pisces till 23 degrees of Aries, it's an outlier. And I could show that in a program as well. It's an outlier because normally Chiron is situated between Saturn and Uranus in its orbit. So we have Saturn here, and I've got an astronomical program that I could show it, but we'll just stay with it at the moment.
Yep.
So Saturn's here and Uranus is above it. Chiron's in between, its orbit's in between, but it's a very elliptical orbit. And when it's between 24 degrees of Pisces and roughly the end of Aries, it's on the out edge. So it's almost outside of Uranus, depending on where Uranus is in its orbit.
Yep.
Sometimes Chiron can be a little bit above it. And so you get inspiration. You've got a Uranus Chiron. So this is the beauty of how you have a little page and you put down all these little things that are the pluses and the minuses, and then you can share your language together. Now, the other thing is you can see the table I have here, Luke.
Yes, I can see that.
Table. It shows the speeds of the planets.
At the time.
It shows their latitude, their declination, their right ascension, their longitude, their altitude, their antitia point, their north node and their geocentric north node and their geocentric south node. All of that data, plus the fixed stars up here, add to this nuance. And so then what we have is we can look in the declination column down here and we see the moon is at 7 degrees plus in its declination. Yep. The sun, of course, is at 7 degrees plus because that's
why they're having an eclipse.
Yep. On the ecliptic. So they're both bang there. And then you look down here and you see Saturn is at declination minus 7
degrees. So it's in opposition, basically.
Yeah. And you know that declinations intensify
the
aspects.
Yeah.
So all of these things, Luke, are
you also got Mars at the same.
Yep. Well, Mars is at 7 as well. So you have
minus 7. So Mars and Saturn are actually intensified here.
Yeah.
Yep.
So this is how I personally do my prognostications. It takes hours, and I used to write them up on Facebook and do them all the time. But it's a really big task to go through all of this stuff. Now, what I'll show you is what you can do as well to judge all of this, the family. We're talking about the birth of the eclipse in 1501, and that same eclipse family is now on the equator. So it's really intense. It's across America. And as we speak at this very moment, and I don't know what's happened since then, but before I got online with you here, they reported that the Iranians had launched 100 attack drones towards Israel.
Okay.
Okay, so taking in mind what we're talking about here, and I don't want to cause alarm or prognosticate the world's going to end or whatever else. What I'm trying to do is point out that what we do as mundane astrologers using eclipses and the other data that we get is to understand how things how the weather is, and the weather. And then we get nations charts and we look at
I was going to
nations.
say, you're looking at the nations that are associated with particular planets.
Yeah, and you look at the charts and you start to associate. So it's a big, long, and you got to have a brain, and you got that just go.
Yeah, otherwise your brain pops a little.
Yeah, it pops a little bit. But I'll just do one more, and then we'll just get on to some easy stuff. But just let me get onto what I was going to show for you, and that is, give me a second here, and that is by putting a bar chart up of the. You should have a nice big picture.
Yes, got the nice big picture. Back with the
Right.
glasses so I can see it a bit clearer because it's small print.
So this is what I also do, is that I compare the birth chart of the Saros cycle with the actual, with the corresponding one for now.
Yep.
And it's really interesting when you look at things from a data perspective, and that's what you and I were looking at when we were horse racing, and what
That's right.
you do really well. You're looking at all this data. And so what pops out? Remember I talked about Argyle?
Yep.
Look where Jupiter is.
Right on the same degree of the node.
Chris Turner would say it's just a coincidence. But I tend to find there is a correspondence, and I won't talk about it because it's a terrible event that happened, but it's in Taurus, and there were a lot of women who were injured.
Yep.
Now, I'm not just making this stuff up, and I don't want to be subjective, and that's the thing that we can do with symbology. And that's what contemporary and modern astrology does. It tends to be subjective in what it's doing. What I was trying to do was and I wrote an article about this that was published in New York, is that rather than subjective, it's objective.
Yeah.
In other words, these are true events. These are events of the sky. This is astronomy working, and what we are doing is trying to understand the story. We're trying to bring the symbolism.
And not just from an astronomical point of view, just so people understand who may not be the astrologer. What Greg's comparing here is where the planets are, that's the outer circle, and where they are by degree, where they literally currently are in the sky. And it's reflecting back, and what it's showing is that Jupiter is hitting that exact same degree as when this eclipse occurred, when the event of eclipses occurred, in 1501. So it's showing that within its own cycle, Jupiter is returning to the same, or to a particular point, and therefore activating a particular point in the chart of the eclipse family, you could call it. That be correct?
That's very correct. And what we're trying to do by all of this is to understand every cycle that happens is about growth. It's not about de-evolving, it's about evolving.
Yep.
And events happen and are caused by effects, if you like, from this whole idea of cause and effect that we get into. It's a science that underpins the astrology. So if you want, and this is what led me to where I was, because when I first learned contemporary astrology, I went off saying things that I probably shouldn't have said to people. And they said, well, you can't just say that. And how do you know that? Well, my journey was to try and bring some sort of correspondence together that was reflecting both the astronomy that underpins the subjective use of phrases or sentences that we put together from this symbology.
Yep. Fair enough. So that's giving you an indication of how that would what you would look as indicators in this current solar eclipse when you're referring it back to the cycle that it's part of.
Yeah.
So you see, in astrology, it's nearly like saying, this is the solar return chart of the eclipse. In essence, it's that sort of thing. Yeah,
it is.
So it's a progression of
the Saros
a series of events of a cycle. And so it's what we've had in this eclipse is a sub-cycle of a much bigger cycle, and those cycles occur at basically every 18.6 years.
Exactly. And what you could do then, Luke, is you can also go back 18.6 years, find the same series, 139, as I showed you before, when I put the chart up of all of the eclipses from 1501 through to now. And we can pinpoint where 139 is, Saros 139. We can click on those charts and put those charts up and compare mundane events or our own personal life events or stories of our family and heritage and all sorts of things. And we can look at all those. And can we see a correspondence that isn't subjective, that is objective?
So you'd be going back to about 2005 and somewhere around October.
Yeah. Guess what? No. In 2005, this eclipse, 19-degree eclipse. Now, what we can't get confused with, which is called the Metonic cycle as well. But let me just, to make sure we're talking about the real data, right? Now we can put that up there, Luke, and we can make sure that what we're talking about is actually what we're talking about. So let's go ahead here to, we want to look at our dates. So let's roll ahead here, fair way along, and let's go along here.
2000s, keep going.
We get up to 2000 and we want to look for 139. Okay, so we have 139 here, but that's a lunar eclipse that's attached to it, right?
And that's July 16, 2019.
Yep, but we want to
go further back.
We want to come back just a little bit further. We want to come back here to...
Keep going.
Yep, 2005.
Stop there. There we are.
139. Now...
29th of March, 2006.
Yeah. Now, see what happens, why I said it's regressive and progressive. Everything is... I explained the lunation cycle and how that works, and how the eclipses go back by 10 or 11 degrees concurrently for that year. However, this cycle of this particular eclipse moves ahead. And this is why it's a little bit confusing. So you can see that the eclipse on the 29th of May, that's 2006.
And that's March or May?
That says 29th of March, 2006. And it was at it was 08 of Aries. That's not the one I wanted. What I wanted here, this is what I wanted to talk about. This is a solar hybrid eclipse. Can you see that?
Okay. Yes, I can see that.
Do you see the degree of it?
Yeah, it's 1905.
So it's the exact degree of the one we have now.
Yep.
Right. And this is what the Metonic cycle does too. And this is what
that one's in a different family though, Greg. It says North 7.
Yes, it's 129.
Yeah.
And this sometimes is what occurs that you have to get through. Okay, because Meaton, who was one of the Hellenistic astrologers with the class of the likes of Euclid and all of those early astrologers, astrologers found that there was a reoccurring cycle of the same degree, as well as the family degree. So this is 19 years between 2005 and 2024.
That's right.
So it's a repeat of the Metonic cycle.
So what would somebody looking at this or listening to it go, okay, so how would events of 2005 at the same time be corresponding to now in 2024?
Well, what I wanted to show, even though this is part of the Metonic cycle, which is a 19-year cycle, and we have an 18.6 cycle. So every 19 years, eclipses of a different family repeat on the same degree.
I got you. Okay, so you
Okay.
got so the
They're
so
pretty
just because it's
clever.
in a different family, other families come through and they hit the same degree during their process.
And this is what Meaton found, and this what shocks me about the amount of knowledge that the ancients had.
Mhm.
They actually had a Kyathea was a the anti-Kyathea was a computer they found off the coast of Greece, discovered by Tony Thetch, and and I've got slides there about it all. I've done a thing on it once before, but what I'm trying to say is the Greeks had a machine with dials on it and can work out all of this stuff. They were the masters of understanding how eclipses repeat and how they run in families. The Babylonians and the Sumerians and the Egyptians all understood eclipses, but the Greeks just had this, like
Capacity
Euclid
to calculate them.
yeah. They just Aristotle, and we go into all of the great scholars of the Greek scholars. They just understood this stuff and that's what drew me to the early text of
I understand
Hellenistic
totally.
astrology.
Yep.
So you asked me what happened on April the 8th,
2005.
2005, same degree.
Mm-hmm.
The Pope died.
Oh, well, there you go.
A religious exalted figure.
There you go.
In this research, it was just astounding to see some of the things about exaltations and the exaltation degrees that were actually objective events that took place.
Because we've also got to remember that happening at 19 of Aries is the sun's exaltation degree.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so the Pope died.
So public figures of some kind are affected. Yeah.
And Prince Charles was going to get married on this day. He had it in the whole royal family had this day set for his
They wouldn't
wedding.
be consulting astrologers to pick that, would they?
I was talking, Chris Turner and I wrote an article way back, and I was looking at whether Charles would become king, and he actually got married, but he had to put the marriage off for a week or something. I'm not quite sure. I'd have to look at the data, but he was supposed to get married on the 8th of April 2005, but the Pope died. And so he had to postpone it. But it shows you the significance of the sun, which is king, and in religious figures, the exaltation
of the king.
Yeah. And so I was thinking about what are we going to see now on that eclipse?
As in the one we've just had.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is the way you would go through and understand how you would look at things. But if we go forward to the 139, because that's what we were talking about.
Which is part of the cycle now, which happened
there it
29th of March. So in other words,
now
2006.
It moves forward. This is part of the lunation cycle. So it was at 8 of Aries. So it moves forward to 19 now.
Yep.
Right?
Yes.
However, the next eclipse next year is at 8 of Aries because it goes back. Hence the slide I put up, progressive and regressive.
I understand.
Everything is turning different ways. And that's the beauty of understanding astronomy, is that the complexity of how would you, it's pedantic, it's analytical, but it says something, because I was challenged once about when I understood astronomy, I was also I wasn't quite ready for the subjectiveness of astrology, so I needed to put a little pause on the subjectiveness and try and work with the objectiveness, the events that actually take place, and those events as as actual events that happen.
Okay. So this is the complexity. Now, do you want to jump across into a general indication of what sort of, as eclipses land in each sign, what people could expect?
Yeah.
So we'll start with Aries. We're literally just having one right now, so we might as well start with it.
You're a good great astrologer, Luke, and you understand probably the how would I put it, the modern interpretations of how we might look at things. So Aries is an intuitive sign. It's about stepping out, doing something for the first time. Bring all that together.
So okay, so if you're talking Aries energy in general, okay, Aries is all about initiation of projects. So you might find, and correct me if I'm wrong as I'm going along, but if you're talking about an eclipse period, it might also say that, and especially this one with the Mars and Saturn, you might have delays to some of your projects in which you're expecting to start or push forward.
Oh, absolutely, because of Mercury.
Yeah, and
because Mercury retrograded.
So the real answer, and this is why I like to go into this topic, give you a general overview. But what we can't underestimate is that while we're saying, oh yes, it's in Aries, there's a lot of other things that are underpinning it all. And the Mercury retrograde, the fact that the lord of it happens to be Mars and it's conjunct Saturn in this instance in Pisces. All of those signs, and this is why astrology becomes quite complex, because you've therefore, as an astrologer, you need to therefore try and blend those interpretations to try and say, well, how would all of these energies be working? Let me give you an example. To use that example, Mars, Saturn, Pisces. Okay, so we're talking about something that, one, Pisces can be sometimes quite boundaryless. That's what it is. It's boundaryless. It's quite intuitive. It's
musical, artistic. Musical and artistic.
Yeah. Did you say fickle?
Oh no, not fickle. That's its opposite.
What did you say? I missed that.
I just said musical.
Musical and artistic, yes.
And artistic.
Fickle, I'm thinking, huh? What are we
talking? You're a dreamer.
That's right. So let's put that and then get Mars and Saturn. And Mars is wanting to initiate a project, and Saturn's trying to control it and put boundaries around it and give it a structure. You try and do that in Pisces, and Pisces is going, what structure? It's a bit like I put what comes to my mind is the classic example of a kid building their sandcastle on the beach, and all of a sudden the wave comes in and washes it all away and has to start all over again. Now that would be
excellent,
Pisces, Mars, Saturn, right?
Excellent.
So you can get these little visions of how would I describe it to someone. So if you look at it in that sense, your projects might feel like you're building, sandcastles in the sand at the moment, but you want to make sure it's a little bit further up the beach. But if you do it a bit further up the beach, you don't have enough wet sand in order to build them in the first place. So you've got this this whole situation. So what it might be is you wait. Your timing might be that you just need to wait a little bit before you start your project. Let the tide go out so you've got a hell of a lot more room, and then you can build your sandcastle without getting the risk of it being washed away with the next wave. So a lot of the time, it's that sort of thing. But that's concentrating on the Piscean side of the rulership. But if you're talking Aries in general, so if we didn't have that Saturn, if we didn't have Pisces, and all of that, so we didn't have a retrograde Mercury, and you had an eclipse in Aries, it might just be that your projects or things you're looking at or things you want to initiate or start are delayed anyway. It has a bit of or you can't get clarity around it. Would that be correct?
Yeah, like I like to draw on what I read there before of Bernadette Brady as well, the idea of this is intuitive. This is, it is an Aries eclipse. So she's drawn on that, but also drawn on the aspects that in the birth of it. So, and we throw the modern aspects into that, and we can come up with something. But yeah, look, if an eclipse, we had eclipses there a while back, because remember, the nodes are regressing. So prior to the Aries, we had Taurus eclipses. And in those Taurus eclipses, Venus was the Lord.
Yes.
And so, you know, and if those families of eclipses that we talked about, the Saros families, if we had a favorable Saros family and it was in Taurus, then we might have something, and Venus happened to be in a position that was good, because Venus only goes 48 degrees away from the sun. So if the eclipse is in Taurus, Venus is obviously going to be very close to it. That's just by astronomy. You
Yep.
work with those things. And so to me, those Taurian eclipses might have been good. The symbols, the glyphs or the symbols we're working with have a lot of things attached to them. They have a line. They have the ones up here that are really great, and the ones down here that not really challenging. That happens within our world, because that's
Yes,
what we have.
absolutely.
Called the table of opposites. And so one of the things I pointed out is that the Lord of Mars and Saturn is Jupiter in Taurus,
Oh, okay.
because they're in there. I use the traditional, so they're in Pisces. There's a correspondence there with Neptune, but let's leave that behind for the moment.
Yep.
Jupiter is the Lord. It's in Taurus. So, you know, some of the things that you would associate with Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter being the final dispositor, as we say, is Venus, which is actually in Taurus.
Exactly. So let's go back, and where we get to, let's go. I'm going to stop here, and we'll start back again. And we were talking about, we were going through the signs. Okay, so we had a little bit about Aries, but okay, we'll just go back to we're getting back to the Aries eclipse, and you talked about it being an intuitive sign or intuition, and I called it starting projects or initiating projects of some kind. And I think that's because don't forget, with an eclipse, we're not talking about something that is, oh, this is definitely going to happen. We're talking about the fact that there are certain generic things that will happen around that time. But before we go into it, let me clarify something with you. Eclipses themselves, generally a solar eclipse or lunar eclipse, what is the general, with the idea of it's blocking light?
Yes.
Okay. So what does the concept of blocking light do generally for activity or things happening on the Earth? So, for example, I use the idea of, say, the Aries eclipse and its initiation of projects, or using your intuition, or new ideas you're coming up with, or building something, you could say, or the start of something. How would blocking light affect that process?
Well, as I explained in our last video, it's because it's the moon. So the sun, for all intents and purposes, the sun is about our choices in life. We choose through the sun.
So you're saying that our choices around those things may be inhibited or not clear?
Yes, because the moon is about selection, what we select and include. Because the moon includes, it grabs hold, it's a receptacle, a repository. So it's about what we hold on to, and that is all about what we may include. So it's selection, what I select. So my choices is reason, the sun, what I think I should do.
Yep.
And what I include is the moon. So I may emphasize more on the inclusion, and the choice that I take may not be as appropriate, especially with the Mercury retrograde in the Aries at this moment. The choice that I make may not be appropriate at this moment. There may be things that I've selected and included in the new project that I will have to reassess when Mercury gets direct in this particular one.
In this particular one. Okay. So that still takes us from, but so really, if you talk about selection, so the sun being your ability to select.
No, it's choice. It's choices, our choice,
I should say. And the moon is
inclusion, selection and inclusion.
So you could say that the eclipse may have an inhibition or not shedding enough light on your choices and what you want to include in doing things.
Absolutely.
Okay, so if we apply those to the signs, then it's about your choices and inclusions in your new project. You may have to go back and reassess what it is or the activities. If you start a project, you might find you get somewhere along and think, this isn't working, I have to go back and redo it in some way.
Yeah, you know, if we go to Taurus, the next one. What
let's do Taurus.
What are the some common contemporary things we associate with?
Well, Taurus is your money, your possessions.
Yeah, you know, things of beauty and
yes,
things like that. So we might not choose, or we may not choose. Our choice might not be at that time the appropriate choice.
Yes.
And so that choice that we've taken to include or we've selected may be slightly towards the emotional side.
Okay. So this would not be in Taurus, it may not be a great time to revisit your financial situation.
Hang on a minute, because remember, when the moon is eclipsing the sun in Taurus, the moon is exalted.
Is exalted, exactly, that's right. So the moon's got more power, and it's also quite positive. Yeah, so is it the reverse in this situation? Is it saying it is a good time to reassess your financial situation?
Well, yeah, that's one of the things that one would have to look at, as I said before, because Venus is probably in Taurus or very close to being in Taurus at the time, because it's close to the sun, and it's never more than 48 degrees away from it. So let's suppose that the Lord of the eclipse is Venus in Taurus.
Then it's probably a very positive time.
So you've got the dignity Lord and you've got the exalted Lord. So the one that misses out is the sun. And so it's the choices we make based upon the beauty of the selection and inclusion.
So are we therefore saying you may want to not, you're nearly going to say, are your intuitive choices a better thing to go with at that point in time rather than your physical reason choices?
That's it. Take the intuitive road rather than the reason road.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So it could also mean that, you know, sometimes you put into a situation where you've got to make choices around your family, right?
Yeah.
And the security of the family. And often that will come down to an emotive, intuitive answer rather than just going with reason and logic. Yeah, while that eclipse is in Taurus.
We could throw the sister in there, the niece, you know,
yes.
Venus.
Any your daughter can be your daughter.
Yeah.
So if you're you know, so your daughter or daughters can be the same sort of thing. All right, so let's move to Gemini. So in Gemini, well, we don't have an exaltation for the sun or the moon in there. And it can, really, Gemini, you know, it's like it does whatever it feels like.
They do assign the nodes to Gemini and Sagittarius.
Okay.
So
don't be, so what Gemini is, I would talk about something along the lines of, there's a fairly mundane component with that. And one is, it might be a time when you might, you may have problems with your computers. Or your devices, or something along the lines of that. Or you might find that there's inhibitions in short distance travel, or delays in getting around the place. A little bit like a Mercury retrograde, but not exactly the same. But also education, that would be another thing. Schooling, brothers and sisters or relatives could come into light as well. So aunties and uncles and things like that, which is a third house thing, but it's still definitely, and also your routines. The Mercury would also be, you know, also a little bit about your routines and your setting up of what, how you put things together and how you put things into some sort of logical order. So what would you like to add to that?
Well, I'll subtract a couple of things.
Okay, subtract a few.
I'm only doing the subtraction because you did mention third house things, and that's at the ABC Association again.
Absolutely.
No. The moon is responsible for short travel, and the sun is responsible for long travel. That's why they have their joys in the third house and the ninth house. So when I talk about short travel, I talk about yes, the third house, but associate it with the moon rather than Mercury. Okay. Mercury's our logic and intelligence. So
Yes,
what we're doing here in Gemini is we're working with the idea of gathering facts, where Mercury wants to gather all
I
the
like
facts
that.
and
Yep.
information, and you mentioned computers and stuff like that. So there's teachers and hairdressers with their hands and all sorts of things that are associated with Mercury. The flight, the messenger, he's the flight person, he
Yeah,
flies.
it could be a phone call or an email or something you get out of the blue. You know.
Yeah, like things that are associated with that. And so when the dimming of the light goes, I was going to suggest that the reason or the choices, which is the sun,
Again, yep.
versus the moon that's there, we might get more emotional and really get pedantic because we're judging everything from an air sign. So we're
Yeah.
judging things from this double body. What should I feel? Shouldn't I feel this? Should I feel that? But the upside of that might be that, again, you're using your intuitiveness. And again, when eclipses would occur in a Gemini, 9 out of 10 times Mercury's going to be there, because Mercury doesn't get
Yes.
away from the sun very much, only by a slight 19, 20 degrees. It does go to 27, but that's very rare.
Yeah. The furthest it's going to be away is Mercury's either going to be in something like Cancer, which is ruled by the moon, or it's going to be in Taurus if it's not
But
in
in
Gemini.
general,
So,
what we're talking about is the significator of the sign being there in the sign. And for these first few signs, this is the way it works. So actually, all the way around, it sort of works that way.
Absolutely.
This is what the beauty of astronomy teaches you, is that the planets don't, a lot of the planets, the inner planets that rule, in the sense, our everyday lives, our emotions, we call Jupiter, I'm digressing again here for a second, but we call Jupiter and Saturn the social planets, because those planets rule the social life that is out there.
Yep.
Mars is in between, but Mercury and Venus are sort of like our social, the inner life. Sorry, the choices that we make in our inner lives,
and the relationships we form.
Yeah, those sorts of things. So when we're talking about Gemini, we have to look at some of the things that you might be wanting to start, because it's a new moon, an eclipse. You might be wanting to start some sort of numbering business, or something to do with things that accounting or information. A library would come under Saturn.
I would nearly say any form of short course.
Any form of something like that, and using your like, Mercury loves to work with its hands. I've noticed there's a lot of hairdressers that.
Would that be more appropriate to an eclipse in Virgo, though?
A little bit different from Virgo, because Virgo.
Yeah, because I just sort of see that the Gemini energy is more about in the head.
And totally.
Whereas the Virgo energy is more about the analyzing and doing and actually hands-on.
And I think the Gemini part of it is also a lot of me in it, whereas the Virgo is a bit more about the service to others.
Yes. Well, that's why I was thinking with the Gemini, when you said something along the lines of not being able to, I would nearly say that you might find that with an eclipse in Gemini, that it's hard to make decisions, because Gemini finds it a little bit hard to make decisions anyway, because it's thinking all the time about all those possibilities. So it might be, during that period of time, that whatever path you're taking, which is fine to do, be prepared to make changes. That's probably the simplest way to decide.
One of the other things we describe in Hellenistic astrology is that the signs, the mutable signs, are double-bodied.
Yep.
And so they take for bloody ever to make up their mind to do things. They take the long way around. That's the way I talk about mutable signs. They can't decide what, they're double-bodied. They're having an argument. This is Romus and Regular. the two, Cain and Abel's.
Castor and Pollux.
Castor and Pollux. It's like, so we're going to have a to and fro about it, and our emotions are going to be detached because it's an air sign.
That's right.
And so it could be a bit like that. So look, if you had something that you emotionally wanted to go through, and something you wanted to attach to something, because that's what you're doing. You're selecting and including something you want to attach to. It'd probably be a good time to start to study about things like that.
And rationalise
Gather
through it.
information about it.
Yes, exactly. Well, let's go to Cancer, because that's obviously going to be a big one for an eclipse.
Oh yeah. It's the moon's place, isn't it?
That's exactly right. So this, I would even, like the moon rules fertility. The moon also can rule, the home, the family, and the environment in general. I would say is probably the best way to describe it. And the environment where you feel safe and secure within.
The crab.
Yes, absolutely. So,
yeah.
having no light on your emotions, or having something that's sort of stopping you making, or you should say, would it be best to say that during this time that happening in Cancer might be a highly emotional time, an emotionally charged time, and not a great time to make rational decisions at all?
We're going to make them quick because
Yes.
it's a cardinal sign.
Yes.
And you're probably going to select and include things that you may not have done, because the sun is about reason and taking time to think about the things that I'm going to do. The emotional response is going to be slightly different. Let me just digress again for a minute. Is that what I wrote about some time ago, which was also published, was the numerous amounts of astrologers probably haven't picked up on, is that in the year 1999, we left the one digit behind. We had been writing 1, 5, 1, 6, 1, 7, 1, 8 for our centuries.
Mm-hmm.
We're now gone to the 2.
Yes.
And the 2 is intuitive.
Yes.
It's the moon, what we're talking
about. It's the moon,
about.
the number of the moon, yeah.
Yeah, and I wrote about the 20. There was an article published called 2020 and the Fourth Way, because for me, the decades from 2000 to 2010, and then from 2010 to 2020, the 2020s and beyond are including these 2s. And when we got to the year 2022, and the 22nd of February 2022,
you got 6 2s.
We had this massive buildup of 2s.
Yeah.
And so the whole idea of this 2, and if you might see, one of the things that is infiltrated, because these numbers infiltrate and seep into the conscious through the unconscious, and are brought out through actions of objective things that take place, is you've seen the androgynous man, the one, the whole argument now about pronouns and who we are and what we are.
Yep.
And there's some of the things that I wanted to point out to you that is because the word reflective is also part of the moon.
Of the moon, absolutely it is. Yeah. And it is always about reflection of light. It's also memory,
Absolutely, memory, and it's an emotional memory as well, an attachment of emotional memory.
It's also very strongly associated to your habits. So you might find that during an eclipse in Cancer, it may be a challenge to some of your habits, or you might find that some of your behaviors need to be reassessed. And that could be the reason for the force of the change. And it may not be you. It may be habits within your environment. It could be habits within your family. It could be habits within those areas that you bring closely into your emotional and what you call your home. Where your space is. What makes you feel who you are. I'm just generalizing here because you can't be specific, because we don't know what other planets are triggering. But
one of the things is also about collection.
Yes.
Hoarding.
Yeah. Well, I would also include that in the Taurus one a little bit as well, but in more so with Cancer in this case.
Yeah. They like to hoard things. You like to grab hold of them and collect them. The crab goes out pops up out of the hole, goes out. That's why I use the images rather than the signs. The crab gets out, he goes, looks around. Is anyone looking? Runs over, grabs something, hoards it, brings it back and puts it in his home.
Yeah. I love the moon in Aquarius. I would say, you know, that's your hermit crab. He just changes his house when he feels like it.
So based upon what we were saying before, we might be selecting
Yeah.
things and including those things, gathering those things that we may have an emotional attachment to, that we find choice was blocked out and we made the wrong choice for including them.
Yeah. Would you go as far as saying that, you know, because the moon is also about caring, and therefore brings in that sort of caring responsibility. Would you find that maybe during those periods there may be an event or a circumstance which force you to have to do or care for someone close to you? That's another thing that could happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I
In
find
a circumstance where you didn't have a choice.
I think I think Venus is attached to caring as well. I think the positive numbers, it's like we call the table of opposites. So we have 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. And, you know, we have Sun, Jupiter, Mercury, Neptune.
Yep. Mars.
Mars, yeah, in that sense.
Yeah.
And then if we go 2, 4, 6, you know, the 2 and the 6 is the moon and Venus. So it's and 6 I find about having to give up something. And this is part of the moon too, you know, have to give up something to nurture something.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go to Leo, which is going to be another interesting one because that's going to be the sun's ruling sign.
Yeah. See, now we got the light of the sun and the choices we make about that. The moon, the emotion, the moon's blocking out this thing, but the sun is also very ego driven.
That's right.
You know,
the sun's all about itself.
I'm the king.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, hang on. I'm not talking about the Leo in the room.
I put that one out there for you.
Yes, Greg, the Leo. Yeah.
So yeah, look, but you know, association of the sign of Leo is the lion.
That's right.
So you know, the lion roars. Anything that associated with Leo is something loud in the context of loud, as in it's big.
Yes, magnanimous. It's huge. You know,
what's a Leo moon? Extreme emotional theatre.
Yeah. Can do their own head in by blowing things out of proportion at times.
Well put.
Yes. Yeah. So the thing is with a new moon, I should say a solar eclipse or an eclipse. I'm getting all confused now. An eclipse in Leo. What are the Leo type things? So interesting enough, the sun itself can also rule authority.
Yeah, so the leaders might make an emotional choice rather than a reasoned choice.
Exactly. So there may be choices. It can also represent not so much the law, but the police or anyone that has some level of authority over you. Or
I would put Capricorn in that one, with the police and the government and that sort of stuff.
Well, that's governmental. That's different. I'm just talking about more, or even more so your boss,
queens.
Your boss at work, for example, and that can be male or female, but it's the sun energy is usually someone who has authority over your decisions to some degree. You might find that the eclipse in Leo therefore means it's probably not the greatest time to take projects to authority to try and get things approved.
Yeah. And you might find, you know, it's the king and queen. You know, it is the king and queen. So the queen has more authority over
the king at that point.
At that point, as I said, they're brothers and sisters from the Hellenic age of stories. We have the brother and sister. You know, so yeah, you know, it's
would it also be in some respects choices that you may have made earlier, if they've been purely egocentric, may come back to bite you at this point, that you may find that there are.
I would put things that bite you and come back to you in what we haven't spoken about in lunar eclipses.
Okay.
I think you gave a good summary of how the lunation cycle works, from a new moon to a full moon, and from the full moon to the waning moon there last time, how the growth comes, culminates with the full moon, then passes off. When we're talking about lunar eclipses, I would go with that with you, with the lunar eclipses. We're talking about
which is
new
a full
beginnings.
moon.
New
beginnings at the new moon. So
and the choices we make on those new beginnings.
Yes. So at that point in time, it might, as I said, it may not be a great time to make or start new things. A little bit like what we said about Aries being another fire sign, but I would sort of say it's about, I would say more so choices about yourself rather than projects, I would say as Aries, but choices around you, your vitality, your health, other things like that might also come into question or come into a little bit of reassessment where you need to trust your intuition rather than just be relying on your reason to go, oh, no, I'm okay, that sort of thing.
And I'd also throw in this one, the lion and the lioness, the moon, the lioness. How does she perform with her cubs? Come near her cubs and what's she going to do?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's going to rip your head off. In actual fact, even if the male lion goes near her cubs, I think she still rips his head off.
She's going to be protective of her children.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly right.
And I think that if I was looking at the common mundane thing out there, if I had a theatre production, and so I might choose the wrong thing to include in the Lion Kings.
Okay, gotcha. So if you were putting a production together during that eclipse, you may, your choices or your decisions around it may not be best presented to the public. Yeah.
The people in the room are going to know.
Yes.
Because it's a Leo moon.
That's right.
You're going to know.
You know what's going on. Well, let's go to Virgo because
the maiden.
What's that? The maiden.
The maiden.
Yeah, the maiden. Yeah, we're calling the maiden. We're not going to call her the virgin. So because that's virginal maiden. There you go. So, but generally speaking, Virgo, like look at the energy of Virgo. It is all about, I still include it as service to others, a little bit like Pisces, but they're definitely sort of hands-on. It's your responsibilities. It's your capacity to work. So your work ethics. It's all. I'd say would just purely your responsibilities would probably be one of the things.
It's running around trying to get things
organized
in a way that is methodical
and
also a little bit sacred. You see, the maiden, you go back to the myths and things like that, and you look at the maiden and the thing of Virgo, and you look at the whole idea of the they called what were the Florence Nightingale and the sisterhood, if you like.
Yep.
Word just eludes me at the present moment because I've got a mind full of all this other stuff. But the sacredness of doing things, like the nurse that is out there nursing for people, but putting together a logical thing, but also a sacred thing, like bringing along things that have some sort of sacred and caring significance.
Yeah, creating those routines that are actually positive for your health and for others around you. And that's why I put it into that component of service, because really it's like you could nearly say it's creating positive routines. And while you've got that that eclipse energy in Virgo, maybe, as you said, it's interrupting reason in this case and your ability to make those decisions. It might be that some of the things that you're doing in your day-to-day routines are disrupted, or you need to change them in some way or reassess them.
Yeah, and I think, one thing we haven't thrown in there as well from a psychological perspective is the temperaments. It's melancholy, it's phlegmatic in Cancer, and then you've got choleric, so and sanguine for Aries.
Yep.
And so you also can flavor things up with those temperaments. And for those that are watching and don't understand, we could go through the fact that, fire signs are choleric. Sorry, sanguine.
They're sanguine. Yeah, I was going to say, hang on.
And then you've got the choleric, and then you've got the phlegmatic, which is the water. And so we get to the melancholy, which is the earth signs. And so more so with, I suppose, Virgo and Capricorn are more melancholic than Taurus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Virgo as such. So you got a new moon. I should say an eclipse. I keep going back to new moon, but it is a new moon. A new moon eclipse or solar eclipse in Virgo. It would probably be, more inclined to some, thinking about. I'm losing it for a second.
I'm going outside into the field, and I'm going to pick some remedies.
Yep.
Right.
Health. That was the other thing I was looking for. Yeah, health. So your health may come under question. That was the point I was going to. Yep.
But my choice is based upon my emotion.
Yeah. I feel this is right, rather than logically it tells me. I'm going to go with an intuitive choice.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's how I would sum it up.
Okay. So let's go to Libra.
Can't make a decision.
No. And Libra is very much, no, you can't make decisions. There's no sense that, well, it's got a very strong reasoning brain and the ability to weigh things up. And I'd say, if anything, that might be where it's challenged. The fact that the capacity to be able to because I think Libra, half the reason they're harder to make decisions is because they spend a lot of time rationalizing and analyzing both sides of everything, and therefore can't find that middle point. So if you put less light on the capacity to be able to reason and make those decisions, you're left with no choice but to make an emotional or an emotive or an intuitive choice in that situation. And it might be sort of, would you say, I couldn't say forced on you, but a circumstance around it maybe shed a light. So it would definitely, in a general sense, it could be associated to close relationships, close personal relationships, or those that are closest to you, that you want closest to you. But also, this would cover medical to some degree. It would also cover legal to another degree, and also to do, I would believe, anything to do with contracts, where there's two sides. Where you've got two things to weigh up, not being put into a position where making a normal decisions is not simple to be able to do, even harder under an eclipse. Would that be what you would see it as?
Yeah. Well, I come at it first from the fact that this is the sign where the light is being diminished. Again, we've got the vernal equinox.
So for those who don't know, it's because the sun is in its
fall, in its depression.
Depression.
Reason being is light is increasing in Aries, light is diminishing in Libra.
I.e., the sun's about to set in the natural horoscope.
Yeah, in the natural zodiac. And so Saturn starts to increase his power because he loves darkness. So Saturn's exalted in Libra. Yeah, so he has this wonderful, wonderful way of being able to be a really thoughtful and energetic person when Saturn is in Libra. It's one of the things that the decisions that you'd make. But going back to how an eclipse would work, so the sun's already in a disposition. He's already got some handicap to his light.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden the moon gets into Libra and diminishes that light again. So it's about decisions. And because we understand it being a sign from a psychological perspective, being one about talking about, should I do this or shouldn't I do that? I can't make up my mind whether I should do that. Cardinals are very quick sign
to make decisions when they make them.
But the choices I make at that time might be one of those. I'd suggest that it might be one of those images or signs when you have eclipses in there to be very, very careful of. Let me give you an example.
That's but pardon.
An example is last year in October last year, we had an eclipse that everybody missed. And I say this from a exaltation perspective.
Yeah.
Or perception. It was at 21 degrees of Libra. That's the exaltation degree
Of
of
Saturn.
Saturn.
Yeah. Okay.
And if you look at what happened in October last year to where we are now on a mundane world thing, things haven't progressed very well from that perspective of that eclipse. Now, it's a south node eclipse, so it's familiarity as well. I'm only talking about that. If a north node was there, and that's what we haven't spoken about as well, whether it's a north node eclipse or a south node eclipse, because the eclipses have this eternal circle going around. The dragon and the snake are chasing the tail. I'll digress for a second here for a moment because we're halfway through. The Vedic or Jewish tale about the eclipses, about the nodes, is a wonderful one, because the dragons, if you like, what they did, there was a party of gods that were having a big party, and they wanted to be part of it, but they couldn't because they were mortal instead of immortal. The gods are immortal. So they put on disguises and tricked the gods to invite them to the party. So they went to the party, and the gods found out what had happened because they drank some sort of potion. You could tell it in any allegoric way you like. But what happened is they got found out with, and they got sliced in half. So that's why you have the north node and the south node.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting concept when we're talking about Libra as well, in that sense. The sign of balancement. We got all the weight up here, the Egyptian feather Mahat, weighing of the heart. This is the idea of balancement of what the representation of Libra is. We have that, and that's one other thing we didn't include. We did include is that we have bestial signs, and we have human signs and intellectual signs and things like that as well, emotional signs. And so the idea of the Libra is we're weighing things up from the heart that has been diminished of light. Are our choices and our selections and inclusions really balanced?
Yeah. And the reason from the heart for people to know is because that rules the sun. The sun rules the heart, and emotions is ruled by the moon. So we're talking about those sorts of I see Libra as in its true form, left to itself, it makes rational, logical decisions.
Yes,
when it can make one. But we like picking on them like that. But that's okay. At the end of the day, the reason, as I said, the only reason they don't make decisions or find it hard is because they weigh everything up to the nth degree and try to be fair. So it's a lovely use of energy, but it's not great when you need to make a decision and you need to be quite firm about it, because you can go, oh, maybe I made the wrong one. Oh, maybe that shouldn't be that way. It's that sort of stuff that goes with it. So when you throw the eclipse in there, and it means those decision-making processes are thrown completely out. And the fact that you also said in Libra that Saturn is exalted, and the sun is in its fall. You've also got, remembering that that Saturn rules Capricorn, which is the opposite sign to where the moon is ruler, which is Cancer. So you're giving a lot of power to these planets that are that are sort of more. So I look at Saturn and see it as a little bit more event-based. Saturn does things. It's the Lord of Karma. Comes in and makes sort of like, if you can't make a decision, I'm going to make that decision for you. Bam, it finalizes it. So
failure to notice.
What's that?
Ignorance and failure to notice.
Yes.
So it causes isolation.
When you've got this eclipse in Libra, you might find that any decisions you've been putting off are made for you by a circumstance outside of your control. That's another way in which I'd look at it. So let's move to Scorpio, because we're getting through them. This is quite a long recording, so I might even chop this up. You never know. So into different parts. But let's go into Scorpio now. And the moon in Scorpio is where it's in its fall, or in its, what do you call it?
Depression.
Depression. I don't like that word, but anyway, that's okay.
Well, it's depressed.
Depression. Yeah, it's depressed. It's not very happy.
It's
Doesn't
not
like
very
being
happy.
there. Yeah,
It's not
exactly.
very happy.
Yeah.
Don't like being there.
So the moon in Scorpio and the sun in Scorpio coming together, forming an eclipse, and we've got to look at what Scorpio represents. So, and God, that can cover a lot of things. So do you want to touch on that first? What you think from a mundane point of view?
Yeah, well, what I'd also like to include, because we're somewhere along the line we've been a bit bringing up all of these things. 15 degrees of Libra to 15 degrees of Scorpio is also what we refer to as the fiery way. I refer to it as the fiery way. The ancients called it the combustion, the combustible way.
Okay.
This is a part of the sky back in those days where the tail of the scorpion is in there, and so there's this whole myth about the Milky Way in the center, and so we're entering the Lord, so the light's diminishing out of Libra and going into the underworld, if you like. Scorpio, the waters of, yeah, you know, we're going down into Hades territory and the River Styx, you know, and the ferryman, and you know, you've got to pay your way through.
Yeah,
so
don't pay him.
So it's a very intense water emotional sign to start with.
That's right.
And it's probably over emotional, if you like, in that sense, almost edging on the point of can be destructive, but out of the, you know, the phoenix rises out of it. That's the whole idea of it. Sometimes we need to go into the bottom and die to be reborn.
Yep.
And, you know, so this is the idea here, I think, of how we might think about it. So the sun's diminished by the light of the Scorpion moon.
Mm-hmm.
We would need to understand that it's a very intense time. So anything that we undertake at that time has something very intense and emotional about it.
Yep.
And so what we may select and include is going to be in a very intense emotional perspective.
Exactly. Hold that thought for a second. Lydia, I'm looking at the time being 2:38. I don't think we're going to get to Laura. Okay. Okay. I'm just checking in with you. That's all. So we had the Laura Fair, which is a little town across from us, and we were going to go yesterday, and we didn't go. And then we thought, oh, might go to today after we finish this. But I'm looking at it going, no, I'm not going to get there now. I reckon they'll be closing up by 4 o'clock. So anyway, so let's go back. I'm going to obviously have to edit this out anyway, so I'm not too fast. So it's diminishing the light of the sun, or even and intensifying the component of the moon. So you put an eclipse in there, which means that you know I would nearly go with the simple thing of saying that an eclipse in Scorpio could lead to some very heightened emotional decisions or emotionally charged decisions that you make that you may wish to not make at that point in time if you can avoid it.
Yeah, and so it's a place that we're also we're in the underworld, so we really are inside our internalism of us. Let me digress here for a second as well. Richard Buckey, a Canadian psychologist who was supposed to have coined the word cosmic consciousness, but it comes from Jacob Cohen, a fellow in the 1500s. And this is all about the Hermetica, if you like, or the Rosicrucians. It's all about growing. And so the intensity that is associated with the Scorpio sign is about the mind is ruled by the moon. It's habitual. The thoughts come in all the time. When we lay down to sleep, we're doing a Scorpio thing.
Yep.
We're allowing the thoughts to come into our heads and be all mashed up. You know, of two minds, Bucky said, this, the Canadian psychiatrist. We are of two minds, or two hearts, as they put it. And so from an intense position in an eclipse in Scorpio, we really need to internalize ourselves and really take a look at what's going on. But it could also be a time when we might do rituals associated with those that have passed.
Fair enough. Absolutely. Yeah. Well,
You know,
it is getting, you know, like, I mean, I know your roots are sort of a Cancerian thing, but really it's literally for those that have passed, because Scorpio is the ruler of, you know, of the death cycle, you could say. So the rather than the birth, the fertility and the birth process, which might be Cancer, you go into Scorpio, you're talking about the passing of, you know, and the regeneration of those things. But
yeah. Look, I don't think there's any too much, you know, and Scorpio does, through the idea of regeneration and metamorphosis, does bring
transform.
back things, and they burst up. But boy, they go through the river Styx first. You
Yes.
know.
So you know, in simple terms, I would also go as far as saying it's probably not a great time to refinance your house.
No.
It's probably, these are the sorts of things. It's not a great time to try and dodge a tax debt, because you might find that someone's going to come after you for it. It might even be that during that period, for certain people, depending, you know, it might be that these sorts of things come to the fore, or you may even be faced with something that has to come to a final end. With Scorpio, I often see that it could be, you know, there could be physical death around somebody at that particular point, depending on where that sits in your chart, or it could be a death or an ending of circumstances that you're involved in. Not a great time probably for investing, I would also say as well, or making decisions around investments, and or borrowing money. So if you're out to borrow money, when I said refinance or out to borrow money, it's probably not a great time to apply to the bank to try and get a loan if that's what you're after. It's those sorts of things. It also, from a purely personal point of view, it may also have not a great time to what's the word for it? Take your stuff out on your partner, because
projection of emotional states. Yeah,
absolutely. And it may actually bring that sort of stuff up. So it would also bring to light, I believe, as well, any sort of emotional game playing, manipulations, gaslighting sort of events, that type of thing, may also be brought to light, or hidden from you during that process.
Yeah, the hidden part, you know, it's a time when, if you were a destructive individual planning something that you wanted to do undercover, it could be a time to do something undercover. And so
don't give bad people a good idea. But yes.
Yeah, we can sum it up in generalizing. It's an intense state of emotional being at that time.
That's right. Exactly. Well, let's go to Sag, because we're getting through them.
Woo!
Yeah. We've got 4 more to go, you could say, just for those who want to know. But in Sagittarius, it changes things again.
Totally.
You're talking about, you know, the sign ruled by Jupiter. It rules overseas travel. It represents high knowledge and scholarly stuff. It also represents the law. So you do have that as another thing to consider. But any sort of education that's outside of formal schooling and that type of thing, and knowledge in that area. So you want to touch on anything there? And religion also touches on religion and religious groups and on all.
Yeah, I'll start first with the image, and the image is the Centaur with the bow back here ready to fire, and so it's a sign of fire fiction.
Yep.
Saggies have got this fire fiction thing going on. So, like all signs, they have two parts of it, but they're it's a predominantly optimistic sign.
Yep.
That wants to go out and create things to stabilize things. Jupiter's word that we use is stabilization. So the Lord of this eclipse, wherever Jupiter is, it's about stabilization in Sagittarius. And Sagittarius is also this the when we talk about racing, we talk about royalty in Leo. The horse's birthday and that sort of thing. When we get to Jupiter, it's the big horse. It's it is the lawyers, the dukes, and the people that are in prominent professional positions that have a privileged position in that sense. But Sagittarius itself, the sign of Sagittarius being a sanguine type of sign that gives you optimism, you want to start something new in that you'll
expand. It often associates to expansion.
Things, expand your knowledge of things. It's a very expansion of knowledge.
And I would go as far as saying that. So during an eclipse, it may not be the greatest time to expand. Say you have a project or a business, it's probably not the greatest time to expand it, but to reassess it before you expand it. Just wait, because it's not going to shed enough light on your decisions. Look, Sagittarians often work off intuition, and they literally, I've seen it. I've got, a friend of mine who's got a Sag rising, and I'm not talking about me because I've got the same, but you can say to someone, oh no, look, just wait, and then we'll do this together, and turn around and 2 minutes later they're off doing it anyway, and then turns out it works out favorable for them, and your timing was wrong, but they just went with their intuition, and sure enough, it was great. Everything bounced in the right direction. So you find that Sag often brings opportunity, which is another word. So it may be that new opportunities coming to light or choices to be made around those may be that you need to make an intuitive choice rather than a choice based purely out of reason in order to take advantage of things.
Yeah, look, it's all of those things, yes. The Sagittarian is the eclipse in Sagittarian, so we've got a Sagittarius moon, which is a moon full of optimism.
But maybe a little bit too optimistic.
Yeah, yeah. So the reason comes, the sun, the reason, the choice is overtaken by the sheer enjoyment of optimism. I'm gonna get this thing going and I'm gonna do it. Hold back.
Yes.
Hold that thought.
I would say that's the when I said making decisions intuitively, but I still believe going right back to the roots of it is it's about maybe taking some time to let things pass before making those decisions. Not an easy thing for a Sag to do who likes to make those decisions on the fly.
Which is really interesting because it is also a double-bodied sign. It's a mutable sign. And so from that perspective, it does get there, but it gets there around the long way around.
Yeah. Yep. That's right. So maybe if you're a Sag or you've got strong Jupiter and you're writing a book or you're writing a text or you're doing something together, it's time to relook at it at that point and read it over again to see what you've and shorten your text by 50,000 pages.
That's the lawyer, the judge, the lawyer.
I think also if you're working in the legal profession during that time with the moon, you would be very careful about taking on a new case or reassessing what's going on, or a circumstance may come to light or be hidden from you during that process that has an impact later on.
Could make emotional decisions based upon my internal emotions rather than my choice of logic.
Yes, exactly. And they could either work for or against, depending on the nature behind the eclipse. So if it was like this one, if it was a strong Mars-Saturn ruling that eclipse and a Mercury retrograde, no, you wouldn't want to be taking on new cases, and you would want to wait, and you're probably going to have something hidden from you that's going to come back to not be all that comfortable. If it's Jupiter with Jupiter and Venus, well, it might find that you're going to win the case without too much of a drama.
Yeah, well, Jupiter's a bit, Sagittarius is a little bit of Leo in it as well, in the sense of it's big because Jupiter's involved.
Yeah.
It's big. Anything you do related to it is big.
Mm.
So you know, the emotional part of it is quite big in that sense. My optimism is enlarged. My internal optimism, and my selection, and my inclusion at that time is enlarged.
Yeah. So my confidence could be overconfident.
Yes.
There's all of those sorts of things. All right. So let's move to Capricorn, because Capricorn is going to be another kettle of fish altogether, being Saturn ruled, and you know, the opposite sign to where the moon is comfortable and ruled in Cancer, or where it rules Cancer.
Here we have practicality at its bottom base.
Absolutely. So, and also the it's probably going to put I see the eclipse in Capricorn as being a very uncomfortable time to make decisions or to do anything, because you're probably going to feel like because that's the point of the moon, like anything you're trying to do is being thwarted or it's being restricted in some way, that nothing's really going in your favor, it's being pushed down. Yeah. So with those feelings, this could also be, I would also look at, I'd nearly go as far as saying, any sort of real estate ventures and stuff like that. Probably not a great time to be buying or purchasing a new home, or making modifications to your home, or trying to set something in motion around the house.
Libraries and collections of things, because the old comes into it with Capricorn, the wise old things that are in there.
Would you go as far as saying because it's a new beginning of a cycle, that it may bring to light things around, like use the house as an example, things around the house that need repair?
Yeah, well, it's the goat. Big nomadic goat, I've watched the behavior of goats for a long time, because we had one out in the backyard there for a while. And then
I think I remember that goat.
They're crazy things, they really are, but they're really intelligent as well.
Yeah, super smart with crazy eyes.
Yeah,
Not saying all Capricorns are like that. Yeah.
And they're slightly melancholy at times.
Yeah, yeah, and they usually eat anything you put in front of them. Or anything they have to get through it. Yeah.
But they're going to get to the top of the mountain.
That's right. So
because they got Saturn, they got determination is one of the things that Saturn is. Saturn's about determination. I'm going to go out and do it, but they run out of steam because it's a cardinal sign. It's very quick. It's the turning of the solstice. So we're going from the darkness, and it's the first appearance of light towards an increasement of light.
Yeah. And the other thing would be essence and things to do with your responsibilities, a little bit like we talked about with Virgo, but in Capricorn, it's even more so from a Saturnian point of view. The other thing, with an eclipse in Capricorn, it may be an area of your life where certain responsibilities or things that you have been involved with for a longer period of time are coming around to be reviewed, or I can't even say reviewed. It's not really the word I'm looking for. What would it be? It's
well, for me, a Capricorn moon is also a signal of detachment.
Yeah. So
from my emotions.
Exactly. But what was the word I was looking for? I had something I was going to say and I've lost it. As this is what happens when you're going through those processes. But you're right in regard. We'll go down the detachment line, because an eclipse would find that events might find you're put in a situation where you are devoid of emotion. Circumstances come up where you feel like you need to cut off. This could be a time where if there's a family feud or something going on, or with a close friend or even a business, that you go, you know what, now's the time, I'm done, and you make the chop. I don't want anything to do with this anymore. Boundary setting is one of the words I was looking for. That's what I was going to say. So Saturn puts structures and boundaries and fences around everything as much as it can, so it can stabilize itself and look at it and that sort of thing. But with that Capricornian energy, it's all about, what do I need to do to achieve my next goal.
Yeah,
So
planning.
what
Like
am
to
I putting
plan.
in place? What are my plans for it? How am I going to go about it? You put an eclipse in Capricorn, and you find that not enough reason comes into it, and you might be forced into having to make emotional choices that affect your responsibilities and your structure and where you're at. So it's not a comfortable sign to have an eclipse in it. From
No,
the sun and moon
it's a
point of view.
detached sign
Yes.
and signifies a certain amount of isolation. But remember, the goat's pretty cunning. It's enigmatic. It's pretty cunning. So, you try and put the boundaries around it, it'll find a way out.
Yes, exactly.
It'll chew its way out.
That's right. I
It'll
said you
jump
put
its
anything in
way
front of
out.
it, it'll eat anything as long as it gets where it's going to go.
It'll jump up the tree onto the branch and make a leap out off the branch to get out of its boundary.
Yes, exactly. That's right. Yeah, they're a smart creature. But that said, in the sense of an eclipse, I sort of, because that's the sun, which is to do with your choices, and the
Yeah, I
moon.
jumped on the wrong branch
Yes,
and it broke.
it could be. Yes, exactly. I just see that some of the choices you might be making during eclipse in Capricorn could lead to the wrong direction or not the path you thought it was going to be. And maybe you're best not to try and get carried away with emotional choices that you're being forced into. And the other big thing with Saturn and Capricorn is all about time. Timing is everything. So just being able to give it the time it needs before you move forward.
Patience.
Yes, patience. Let's go to Aquarius. We've got 2 to go. So Aquarius, well, hey, look, it's the opposite sign to the sun ruler of Leo, so it likes to, have its own way there. And the moon in Aquarius, well, I don't think the moon really knows where it sits in Aquarius, because it's probably the most, the moon loves to be nice and comfortable and looked after and, secure. You throw it in Aquarius and it just energizes it to the point where it goes this way and that way and that way or this way, whatever. And it's like, they don't know where they land.
Well, I wrote an article about the archetype of Aquarius, and it's where the sun sits underneath the light.
Yep.
And it's under the ice, and it wants to break through the ice and come out of the ice and emerge. But before it can do that, it's got a lot of work to do.
Yes.
It is a humanitarian sign.
Yes, it is.
The image of it is the fellow standing there pouring the
water,
the essence of knowledge into the immersible soup of Pisces.
Yeah. And that's why people get it confused and think it's a water sign when it's actually an air sign.
Yeah, but the ancients referred to it slightly, they had this connotation of water in the metaphor that they use, because remember,
the old ruler was Saturn.
It is a Saturn sign, but associated with it is the correspondence of Uranus. So we give it that detachment. So the severing of Uranus, the Titan by Saturn, of the genitals and falling to sea made the foam, and of course we have Aphrodite moving out of it. But before the urn or what I call the urn of Minos comes to fruition, the pirates, it meets the pirates on the sea.
Yep.
And so it's got to go through this process, if you like, of development before it actually gets there. So it revolts, it revolutions.
I was about to say, you're talking about something that Aquarius is not known for its subtlety in any way, shape, or form. And if you think about it even from a Saturn point of view, if Capricorn's Saturn is about building the boundaries and putting those in place and putting plans ahead, that Uranus, or you could say the Aquarius Saturn, is all about breaking those boundaries down and rebuilding them.
That's what I'm talking about, the ice. Yeah. The sun's underneath the ice and it wants to break through and,
Yeah. So this is a time when, if you're, say, involved in technology specifically, it may not be the greatest time to make changes to that technology.
Yeah.
Because technology is very an Aquarian or Uranian type of stuff. AI, for example, now is you can see that as part of the age of Aquarius and moving forward into that. But you've also got so you take the moon and the sun. Go back to its basic things. So the sun being the ability to make decisions, and the moon trying to collect and put, to feel secure around those decisions, and be emotional about it. Neither one of them like Uranian energy. Neither one of them like the Aquarius energy, because it's all about, irrational or fast and too quick a decision for your reasoning, rational mind, and the emotions doesn't like anything changing that quickly and rapidly.
And you're not going to change your mind, Luke, because it's a fixed sign.
That's
so
right.
You go, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. Well, let me just take you back to, because I've been telling the little stories about the cosmological stories about it, and the one where Zeus changes himself into an eagle and comes down and grabs hold of the cupbearer, the little boy, and takes him up and uses him as a slave. And the little boy gets pissed off with that. I'm not gonna be any more of this. So he jumps out and comes back down. He's had enough of being under control.
Yep.
So he breaks free.
Yeah.
It's about this idea of signs containing two parts to them.
Yes.
It's really beautiful in that.
Well, it's also those extremes, isn't it? So,
incredibly knowledgeable.
Yes. Well, that's the other thing. Don't forget, Aquarius but it's usually an intuitive knowing rather than knowledge some of the time. So in other words, it's information coming from an area they can't necessarily explain, and they'll say, no, I just know. And at the end of the day, that's the key phrase for Aquarius is I know. So you do get a few know-it-all Aquarians out there, but we won't pick on those ones because we know they exist. But the funny thing is with that Uranian energy, or I should say the Aquarian energy. So going back to the eclipse, I would literally be looking at it saying, here's a time of having to make or changes occurring, maybe even forced changes or situations where you're through a dramatic event sometimes, or I don't want to use the word drama, but it's like a circumstance which is, because I see Aquarius or Uranian energy as extremes. So a certain circumstance which forces an extreme of some kind in order to force you into making a change. It's also about change and radical change. So, but if you know that things need to be changed, you might find that you're ready for a change or you want to do something. A classic example might be if you're in a relationship that's not going that well, and you might find Aquarius in your chart sits in a relationship house, then an eclipse in there might be something that really brings something out that you need to deal with in your relationship, and it may result in a breakup. And if it doesn't, it's a renewed sense within that relationship. It brings out the absolute truth. And that's the other key point, I think, with the Aquarian energy, is it does. And Uranus brings out, Jupiter is about the truth. But if you go to a lawyer and you go to a barrister, truth is what they can make you believe. Okay, this is the truth.
Yeah,
when it comes to Aquarius and Uranian energy, it's like, no, that's not universal truth.
It's fixed.
This is the truth. Yeah, it's fixed. It's a fixed truth. So there's a truth, one truth and only truth. Bang, you're going to deal with this truth. And I know why that truth is, and I'm going to tell you about it. That's exactly right. And the other thing with that can be with the eclipse area is about if there's anything hidden, if there's anything not being clear in your life at the time, or circumstances that aren't coming to light, that eclipse may actually bring that event forward for you to deal with, and not necessarily in a way that you expected it to be. More
or
so.
It could also hide whatever it is,
Yeah, that's the other thing. I was going to say.
Diminishment of the light. It wants to break through the revolution that come up out of the ice and break through and say, look, I'm in the sunshine now, and here it all is. Here's the evidence. I've got it. but you may select or include things that are on an emotional perspective rather than a normal Aquarian
Reasoning. Yeah.
new moon seed. That
So
you
people
would
may
go
not
forward.
listen to your reasoning at that point in time because the moon is putting, and they're saying, you know, the classic example, someone has a reaction to something, oh, look, he's just going off. So they don't take you serious.
Yeah, and you're detached from it because it's an air sign.
That's right. So look, that's an interesting one. But let's go to Pisces, the last one of the signs, and an eclipse in Pisces. Nearly feels like we've just had one now, but no, even though it was in Aries, because of that Mars, Saturn, and the retrograde Mercury. Mars, Saturn being in Pisces as the ruler of it, it makes it feel a little bit Piscean in its nature. But a true, what do you call it, eclipse in Pisces. Where would you?
What we're doing now is prematurely talking about it because that's where. Up. The nodes are going to slip into there and Pisces. And I often say, just before we get there, I wrote in an article also that was published in the US. I also said that the nodes tend to bring forward the issues of collective humanity before the eclipses.
Okay.
You know, the North Node slips away into Pisces, and then we have the eclipse. It brings the flavor of what we're going to deal with, if you like.
Yep. Okay. So you got all this Piscean energy, and the Piscean energy being very artistic, quite nebulous in some respects. It's like it's universal. I mean, in some ways, it's universal love. It's humanitarian in a different form. It's like caring and sacrificial.
I'm going to give something up. I'm going to be a priest or a nun.
Yes, exactly. Or I'm going to, you know,
devotion.
Devotion's the word I was looking for. Exactly. Whereas compassion and emotion for Cancer, and intensity is the emotion for Scorpio. Here we talk about compassion.
Empathy.
And empathy. That's exactly right. So where you have a moon, a new moon / solar eclipse happening in Pisces, you've got the sun, which doesn't really have much control over being able to make decisions in Pisces anyway, because a lot of its decisions are made intuitively in general. And then you give more of that emphasis to the moon to make those decisions and be able to start things. So it's really going to be a confusing time. I'd say you wouldn't have a great deal.
It's an overload of empathy and feeling.
Yeah. So would it be best to say that anything you're doing at that point in time, be wary that you might be being overly empathetic or overly sympathetic to a situation that may not need it. You also got to be careful about indulgences in drugs or alcohol or other things that may be of a negative. Also, swimming,
escapism,
water, and escapism of any kind. That's right. With this one coming up, are we likely to see some sort of events associated to water, for example?
Yeah, look, absolutely. In that sense, I would put it as the refugees.
Okay, from a global point of view.
From a global perspective, it's the refugees. We are moving towards that from my perspective.
So where's the Lord of that going to be at the time?
Jupiter. Well, Jupiter's going to move into Gemini and then into Cancer. But I haven't looked at the ephemeris or I could throw the chart up for us. We'll do that next time and just have a quick look at because we're not there. We're still in the Aries, and next year we'll still be in Aries. So we'll look at that at another time. But just hold that thought for the second, because when Uranus will be in Gemini at the same time as well, and I'm really worried about that. But
and why are you worried about Uranus and Gemini?
We won't go to that at the moment.
Okay.
I don't want to spoil that. Well, let's stay back on the eclipses in
Could I say has it got anything to do with the possible? Could I say has it anything to do with the possible misuse of AI?
A lot of things. I'm not going to go there at the
All right,
moment.
let's leave it at that. Yep.
We can do we can do a talk on the ingress of Jupiter into Gemini, followed by Uranus into Gemini.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's do that at another time.
Yeah. Let's focus back on what we were talking
Pisces.
about.
Yep.
To end this, so we have a Piscean sun who is quite knowledgeable, incredibly intuitive because it's water and no boundaries. So the thoughts are always there and inducive. But when we have the eclipse there, we're leaning way too much on the emotional side.
Okay. So that's what I would suggest too. So with that whole Piscean energy, it would be definitely a no to making any rational decisions. It might be that it brings forward events where you show an over sympathy or over compassion for something that may not require that, or may not be, what's the word for it? May not deserve it in some way. And you may also be misguided. So there are issues to do with, self-deception, or even someone else deceiving you, depending on where it sits in your chart. So if you find that eclipse is happening exactly opposite your Venus, and all of a sudden you come home saying to your parents, "Oh, look, I've just found a new partner. Isn't she wonderful?" Right? I'd be going, let's just give this a bit of time.
Yeah. Or isn't he wonderful?
I was using she being Venus, But yes, it could be a he if it's a girl's chart. Absolutely, it could be, or isn't he? Or it could be either sex. Who knows? But
pronouns are appropriate these days, mate.
Yeah. So
but the whole idea here is just an overload of inclusion.
That's right.
Based upon not a logical reasoned out, something that's logically reasoned out. So we need to be careful, in particular in Pisces, about how we might think about those decisions that we make to include things that are really loaded full of compassion and just
So I'm gonna summarize a little bit here, just because before we head off. One of the other things we haven't had time to do, but I don't think we need to, but I am going to sort of emphasize to people that when an eclipse happens in a particular sign, it's going to fall somewhere in a house in your chart, in your individual chart. And each house, therefore, has another, it's a great way of saying, so let's say, for example, we talked about Aries. Let's say your Aries eclipse, which was all about potentially, new projects or starting new things or whatever. And that
falls in your 10th house.
What's that?
It's in your 10th house.
Say it's in your 10th. I was going to say 6th, but let's say it's in your 10th. In your 10th house, either way, both of those, one's your job and one's your career. So one might be not a great time to look for a new job, or there might be some changes or something going on in your job that is not coming to light, that's not being shared to you, and something might be changing your routines. You might be finding that they're going to change your position in some way, or that's what's being put in process and you don't know about it. And the same might apply to your career or your business situation. So if it's in the 10th house. So each of those houses, depending on what it is, you sort of cross-reference what we've done. So what we've said here for each particular sign, then look at where that is in your house. So if it's in your first house, it's going to have to do with you personally. It's going to have a lot to do with yourself. Also may even be to do with your physical appearance, but it's also your personality, the things that you're doing on who you are as a person. Your second house will be your money, your finances, but also your own values. What's that?
Yeah, what supports you in life.
Yeah, what supports you in life, your security, how you are. The third, I'm being very general here, but this is for people just to work with it. So your third house will cover things like your education. If you're going to school, for example, or you're going, or you're not so much college because that's more than ninth, but at the same time, you travel, short distance travel, how you think about things, your reasoning mind, and also your relatives, your brothers, sisters, aunties, uncles. So anything that could be happening within that area. When you go to the fourth house, it's your home situation, your current house that you live in, your family, all of those associations,
And
depending
your
on
parents, your hereditary parents.
your hereditary parents, that's right. Your father predominantly, believe it or not necessarily your mother, it works in opposite. But also your emotional responses to things and how you are. You might find that there are unconscious things to deal with. So something that's coming up that's not necessarily conscious in your mind, but it's being revealed to you and it's making you feel a certain way. When you move into the fifth house, well, that's a big area, but that represents your close personal friends. We're not talking acquaintances, we're talking those who are your closest friends. It also influences love affairs, casual relationships. It also is to do with your speculation. It is to do with real estate. It's to do with your children. You're talking and your creativity. So any sort of creative projects and things that you want to start and that type of thing was definitely coming from the fifth. Entertainment, sports, anything that you're involved with there. So it covers a lot. Have I missed anything there, Greg?
No, I was going to suggest we could do a whole thing on the houses, but
we can do that, but I'm just going to give them something to work with. And your sixth house is your responsibilities, your workplace.
It's a labour house.
Yeah, and all the hard work you do. And it also involves your pets. So your dogs, your cats, or whatever pets you have.
And your health.
And your health. I did say health, but
well, not health in the sense of it's illnesses that befall you.
Illnesses more so. Your actual physical vitality and health would come under the first house a little bit more than it would be the sun. So anything in the first. The seventh house is your marriage partner or your closest partners, whoever is your partner with you. It also is your business partner if you have a business. It's associated to your open enemies. So anyone you know you have open conflict with who doesn't like you may rear their ugly head. And also,
the good part about that is that you can see them.
That's right. That's the difference. They're an open enemy, not a hidden enemy. So which is another whole other ball game.
House.
But also, and if it's happening in your seventh house, sometimes it's. I would also suggest that events may be something that's brought into your life as a form of a new relationship or a person you meet could be associated with what's causing the eclipse.
And somebody that's away from your environment.
That's right.
It's totally opposite your environment. So it could be someone overseas or something to do with overseas.
Yeah, I would normally throw that in the ninth house, but if there's a correlation between the both, it's definitely associated to that. The eighth house is, okay, big one again. So you're talking about your own sexuality, your sexual relationships, death, taxes, any sort of crises that occurs in your life, your physical, mental, emotional, psychological issues that you need to be brought to the surface to deal with, inheritances. So if you've got anything going on with an inheritance at that time, especially with the sun and the moon, because it's often your mother and father, there may be complications in that area sort of thing that need to be dealt with.
It's a heavy research place too. It's an idle place, but it's a heavy research place. You're going down deep.
Yes, yeah, emotionally deep into what's, and anything that's your dark side. So that's sort of where it brings. So if you've got, skeletons in the closet, expect those skeletons in the closet to either be hidden further down or they're going to come out and they're going to bite you in some way. They're going to knock you over the head. So then you go to the ninth house, and the ninth house is about overseas travels. This could involve trips. It's also about higher education, either in a formal sense or in a non-formal sense. It's also about religion and your spirituality in that respect, your belief systems.
A place where you love to go to.
Yes, exactly. Where you love to go. That's right. And then we'll go to the 10th house. We've touched on that before. It's also about your career. It's about your status. What's that?
Status, reputation.
Your reputation. So, how people see you, how you like to be perceived in the world. It also represents your mother, and things to do with your mother and that type of thing. And there's a bit more to it, but I can't remember off the top of my head because I'm just running through these quickly. Go to the 11th house, and it's also, which is the house that represents that's where you come into your acquaintances, so people that you know, but you don't necessarily know very well, or you associate with.
Allies.
Allies is another one.
People that are going to.
Your wishes, hopes, and fears. But it's also about your house of gains. So,
manna from heaven.
Manna from heaven, yeah. So your second house might be where you get money. Your eighth house might be other people's money, but where you're gaining out of all of that's coming in through your 11th house. So
acquisitions and
Yes.
what we would call allies. So we get our allies, people just give us stuff.
Yes, and groups. That's the other thing. So if you're a member of a particular group or an organization or a humanitarian organization or a church organization or whatever, your organizations and the people associated with that are all through the 11th house. And then you go into the 12th, which is the hidden one. This is where your hidden enemies lie. You don't want to go there too far, but you know, there's stuff you can't see. It's also it's a difficult house because the 12th house can represent institutionalization. So hospital visits or imprisonment, even at extreme cases. But it's also associated to your psychic stuff. So it's really if something's happening and things are coming to the surface, but you can't tell what they are, you're probably going to find you're in an eclipse in your 12th house. You get Buckley's of finding out what it is at that point in time.
It's another world.
It's another world.
You're not attached
unless it's in your dream state. You know, you might find you have visitations from dead parents or grandparents or something at that point in time.
A place of very isolation, as in the self itself.
Yeah, and
isolated there.
Also, we talked about crises with the 8th house. This is psychosis. So this is an area where you need to be very careful. So if people end up with a mental illness of some kind, they end up, you know, going into a hospital or having to go into some sort of care. This is the sort of thing that the 12th house comes from. Okay, so you need to be looking at how things affect you. It's more than responsibility. It's the sacrifices we have to make as well. So it's the other side of the coin. So anyway, I think that covers it. So what you'd be doing is looking at what sign they're in, and then if you wanted to run that past each particular house, if you know your chart, and then you can make a generalized, pretty strong plan as to how and what that should be. If you needed more information on what's the Lord of it, what's this, what's that, you can reach out to someone like ourselves, either Greg or myself, because when those eclipses come up, we'll be able to see where they are anyway, if you don't know that much about astrology. So, and then sort of, I know you're pretty up to date, Greg, a lot of the time doing a little bit of when the eclipses come up, putting something out there either online or on Facebook or other places.
Well, I was retired until you got me out of retirement.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, he did do it all the time. Now he doesn't do it as much.
So contact Luke's the new kid on the block. He's getting there. He's out there and he's got all this information.
Well, yeah. I've been doing it for a long time, but I just decided I better get off my backside.
Yeah.
I wanted people to get the facts rather than the whatever garbage they want to put out there on, you know, someone who professes to be an astrologer. So
he's got to do the hard work because he's got the Saturn going on.
Yeah, well, I am a Capricorn. All right, we'll leave it there, Greg. What do you reckon?